Hello there and welcome to Biology with Charles, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight, we're turning our attention inward. Not in the philosophical sense, so no need to worry that this is about to become an identity crisis in pyjamas, but in the literal biological sense. We're going to spend some time with the quiet machinery inside you, the organs that work all day and all night without applause, without rest days, and without ever sending a formal complaint, even when you feed them at odd hours or ask them to function on less sleep than they were ever designed for. There is something very strange and very comforting about that. Beneath your thoughts, beneath your plans, beneath the part of you that is listening right now, there is a whole working world tucked neatly inside your body. It is busy, organized, coordinated, and astonishingly loyal. So before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, and what sort of hour it is in your corner of the world. Is it late and quiet, or early and grey, or somewhere in between where the day still hasn't quite decided what mood it is in? And if you find this soothing, interesting, or simply a nice gentle place to let your thoughts slow down, I'd be ever so grateful if you liked the video and subscribed. It helps this calm little corner reach more people who might need a quieter kind of science at the end of a long day. Now then, get comfortable, let your breathing settle, and we'll begin with the simplest truth of all. You are alive not because of one grand gesture happening inside you, but because of many small and constant ones, performed faithfully by organs most people only think about when something goes wrong. It's an odd thing, really. Most of us go through our day with only a vague awareness of what is happening inside our own body. You wake up, perhaps stretch a little, perhaps regret the alarm clock a great deal, and then you get on with life. You eat breakfast, answer messages, walk through rooms, make decisions, worry about things that may or may not deserve the attention, and all the while there is a team of organs working beneath the surface with remarkable discipline. Your heart is moving blood, your lungs are trading gases, your liver is processing chemicals, your kidneys are filtering fluid, your stomach and intestines are dealing with whatever you last decided counted as lunch. Your brain, perhaps the busiest and most demanding of the lot, is coordinating the entire affair while also generating thoughts, memories, emotions, and occasionally very unhelpful reminders of something embarrassing you said 8 years ago. The word organ itself can make the body sound mechanical, as if we're made of detachable parts laid out on a tidy workshop bench. But real organs are not isolated little gadgets. They are living tissues woven into systems, always talking to one another through nerves, hormones, blood flow, pressure changes, chemical signals, and electrical rhythms. Nothing works alone for long. The body is less like a stack of separate machines and more like a crowded but well-run city. Different districts have different jobs. Some store, some transport, some regulate, some defend, some process, some clean up. There are supply routes, control centres, waste systems, repair crews, and emergency responses. There are quiet hours and busy hours. There are routine tasks and moments of crisis. And there is almost never a moment when everything stops. Even in sleep, perhaps especially in sleep, your organs remain fully on duty. That is one of the great biological misconceptions, the idea that rest means inactivity. When you lie down and close your eyes, the body does not shut the lights off and put its feet up. Sleep is not the absence of work. It is a change in the kind of work being done. The brain shifts states, hormones rise and fall in carefully timed patterns, the heart changes rhythm, breathing changes depth, the liver continues its chemical housekeeping, the kidneys continue filtering, cells repair damage, rebalance signals, and prepare for another day of demands. Rest for you is an active maintenance period for them. They are, in a sense, the most committed night shift in existence, and yet, for all their importance, organs are easy to take for granted because they are so good at not drawing attention to themselves. A healthy heart does not send you a cheerful memo every morning saying, "Just to let you know, I managed another 100,000 beats yesterday." A liver does not ask for praise after detoxifying compounds, storing glycogen, managing nutrients, producing bile, and helping regulate metabolism. Kidneys do not hold a press conference to celebrate having filtered enormous volumes of blood without fuss. The body's best workers are often its quietest. Their success is measured not by what you notice, but by what you never have to notice. It helps perhaps to begin with what an organ actually is. An organ is a structure made of different tissues working together to perform specific functions that are important for survival. That sounds simple enough on paper, but the beauty lies in the coordination. Tissues alone have jobs. Muscle tissue contracts. Nervous tissue carries signals. Epithelial tissue lines surfaces and forms barriers. Connective tissue supports and binds. But when arranged in just the right architecture, supplied with blood, linked to nerves, and controlled by chemical signals, they become something much more capable. A stomach is not just a bag. A lung is not just a sponge. A kidney is not just a filter. Each is a specialized living structure shaped by millions of years of evolutionary problem solving. And survival, when you really look at it, is a far more complex task than it first appears. To stay alive for even one ordinary day, the body must do a remarkable number of things at once. It must bring in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide. It must circulate nutrients, hormones, immune cells, and heat. It must maintain the right pH, fluid balance, blood pressure, temperature, and glucose level within surprisingly narrow limits. It must digest food, absorb useful molecules, store reserves, neutralize harmful substances, and remove wastes. It must defend itself from infection, while avoiding the mistake of attacking its own tissues. It must repair wear and tear, monitor the outside world, respond to stress, and adjust to rest. And all of this must happen continuously, quietly, and usually without conscious supervision. This is why biology is so humbling. The more closely you study the body, the harder it becomes to see life as ordinary. Familiar, yes. Common, certainly. But ordinary, not at all. Every moment of being alive depends on layers of organisation so deep and so precise that they almost feel excessive. The heart alone is impressive enough to earn a lifetime of attention. The brain is so complex that even now, with all our research and imaging and careful experiments, it still keeps many of its deepest workings partly hidden from us. The liver behaves like a patient chemist, warehouse manager, and sanitation department rolled into one. The lungs manage enormous surface area folded compactly into the chest. The intestines turn food into building material, fuel, and future decisions, given how much mood and energy can depend on what happens there. And each organ must do its job while staying in conversation with the rest. That constant conversation is one of the most important things to understand. The body does not operate on a one organ at a time basis. Take something as simple as climbing a flight of stairs. It seems like a muscular action, and of course muscles matter. But the moment you begin, the brain coordinates movement, balance, and intention. The heart increases output. The lungs increase ventilation. Blood vessels adjust their diameter to direct flow where it is needed. Hormones may shift. The liver helps maintain fuel availability. The kidneys monitor pressure and fluid balance in the background. If you have recently eaten, the digestive system is still processing nutrients even while you move. If you are anxious while climbing those stairs because you're late for something, the stress response may add another layer to the story. A single small action can involve nearly the whole internal cast. It is also worth saying that the term vital organ is often used a little differently depending on context. In everyday language, people usually mean the organs most essential to immediate survival, such as the brain, heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys. In a broader sense, many other organs are equally important to living well over time. A body is not a collection of optional decorations surrounding a tiny set of winners. Different organs matter in different ways, on different timescales, under different circumstances. You can survive damage to some organs better than others. Some have a surprising ability to compensate or regenerate. Others are far less forgiving. But none of them are random passengers. They are all there because bodies are complicated, demanding places to run. There is also a deep elegance in the way organs solve physical problems. The lungs, for instance, must expose blood to air without drying out the tissues or letting the outside world spill carelessly into the bloodstream. So they create millions of tiny moist sacs with thin walls, protected inside the chest and constantly ventilated. The heart must move blood with enough force to reach distant tissues, but not so violently that vessels are damaged. So it uses chambers and valves and rhythmic electrical conduction to maintain directed flow. The kidneys must filter the blood without throwing away everything useful, so they filter broadly and then selectively reabsorb what the body wants to keep. The liver must process nutrients and toxins entering from the gut, so it sits in a strategic position connected to a special blood supply. Again and again, structure and function are tightly linked. Shape is not decorative in biology. Shape is strategy. Even size and location tell stories. The brain is protected in bone because it is delicate and essential. The heart sits between the lungs, centrally placed for circulation, sheltered by the rib cage. The liver occupies a large portion of the upper abdomen because metabolism is not a side task. The kidneys are tucked high toward the back, well supplied with blood because filtration demands it. The intestines are long because absorption takes space. The stomach is muscular because digestion begins not just chemically but physically. When you learn anatomy, you are not only learning names and positions, you are learning why the body is arranged the way it is. Of course, the body is not perfect. Evolution does not design from scratch with a clean sheet of paper and a cup of tea. It modifies what came before. That is why we have a throat that asks air and food to share space in a way that occasionally leads to choking, which is not what one would call ideal planning. It is why the human spine, excellent in many respects, can become rather cross about modern sitting habits. It is why some organs can fail under pressure from diets, infections, toxins, genetics, or age. Biology is brilliant, but it is not magical. Organs are robust, yet vulnerable. They can adapt impressively, but they can also be overwhelmed. That vulnerability is part of what makes understanding them so important. When people learn about organs only in times of illness, the body can feel frightening and unfamiliar, like a house whose wiring you never noticed until the lights began flickering. But knowledge changes that relationship. The more you understand how your organs work, the less the body feels like a mysterious container, and the more it feels like a living process you can respect, support, and care for. You begin to see why sleep matters, why hydration matters, why movement matters, why chronic stress reaches farther than mood alone. You start to understand that health is not merely the absence of catastrophe. It is the successful cooperation of organs over time. And cooperation, perhaps, is the word to keep returning to. The body depends on balance, and balance depends on communication. A healthy organ does not simply work hard. It works in the right amount, at the right time, in the right relation to everything else. Too much heart rate can be as troubling as too little. Too much immune activity can be dangerous. Too much clotting, too little clotting, too much fluid, too little fluid, too much sugar in the blood, too little available to the brain. All of these reveal the same principle. Life is regulated. The body is not aiming for drama. It is aiming for stability. Scientists call this homeostasis, the maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment despite constant change around and within the body. It is one of the grand themes of physiology. Temperature drifts, the body corrects. Blood pressure falls, the body responds. Carbon dioxide rises, breathing adjusts. Glucose changes, hormones shift. Water intake changes, the kidneys compensate. Organs are the workers of homeostasis, each contributing its part to the ongoing effort of keeping conditions within survivable ranges. The body is not static, but it is always negotiating. This is also why the organs can feel almost invisible when they succeed. Homeostasis feels like normal life. You do not notice stable blood oxygen. You do not celebrate appropriate electrolyte balance. You're not usually struck by awe at the fact that your blood remains fluid inside vessels and clots rapidly outside them, though frankly it deserves at least a polite nod. The body's greatest triumphs often pass without ceremony because they allow the rest of life to happen uninterrupted, and yet, the more quietly you sit with this, the stranger it becomes. Right now, as you listen, the organ inside your chest is pushing blood through a branching network, long enough to circle great distances if laid end to end. The organs in your abdomen are sorting nutrients, producing enzymes, storing fuel, filtering wastes, and helping regulate countless chemical conditions. The organ inside your skull is building this experience itself, turning sound into meaning, attaching memory, shaping attention, perhaps letting some thoughts drift by while others settle. You are being kept alive by structures you cannot directly command into existence, and cannot consciously operate moment by moment. You can choose to stand up, to stretch, to take a sip of water, but you do not personally negotiate every sodium ion, every bile salt, every alveolar gas exchange, every heartbeat, every synaptic adjustment. Much of your life is being sustained by intelligent processes that do not require your narration. There is something restful in that. Not because the body is effortless, it certainly is not, but because it is dependable. It carries on without asking you to supervise the details. It is, in the best sense, practiced. The organs know their work. They have been doing variations of it since before you had language, before you had memories, before you understood what a body even was. Long before you could name a heart, you had one beating. Long before you learned the word liver, yours was already processing nutrients and clearing byproducts. Long before you had any opinion on kidneys, they were serving you with tremendous consistency. The first loyalty you ever received was biological. So over the course of this slow and gentle journey, we're going to meet these organs one by one. We'll look at what they do, how they do it, why their structure matters, how they cooperate, and what makes each one so essential to the ordinary miracle of staying alive. We'll begin with the obvious leaders and the quieter specialists. We'll move through pumping, breathing, filtering, digesting, regulating, defending. We'll see how blood becomes a transport system, how food becomes energy, how waste becomes a problem to solve, how control is maintained, and how all these organs together make a body that can think, move, feel, heal, and rest. For now, though, it is enough simply to appreciate the fact that you are not a still thing. You are an ongoing event. Beneath your skin is a coordinated world of tissues and timing, chemistry and motion, effort and repair. The body does not wait for you to notice it before it begins its labour. It is already at work. And perhaps that is where the calm begins, to know that even in silence, even in darkness, even in the drifting edge of sleep, there is order within you. Quiet, constant order, a pulse, a breath, a signal, a filter, a rhythm. And with that in mind, it makes sense to start where so much of that coordination is gathered, in the organ that does not merely sit in the body but interprets it, directs it, remembers it, and, in a very real sense, makes your experience of being you possible. If there is one organ that most clearly earns the right to be called a silent conductor, it is the brain. Quietly tucked inside the dark, protective shell of the skull, soft where bone is hard, easily damaged and yet astonishingly capable, it spends every second managing a body that never quite sits still. It listens, interprets, predicts, remembers, corrects, initiates, suppresses, compares, and decides. It keeps track of the outside world through the senses, the inside world through the body, and the imagined world through memory and anticipation. It allows you to recognize a face, pull your hand away from a hot surface, remember a song from years ago, and somehow still leave you wondering why you walked into the kitchen in the first place. It is magnificent, demanding, and just flawed enough to remain deeply human. The remarkable thing about the brain is that it does not merely help you live, it creates the experience of living. The sound of this voice, the meaning of these words, the picture in your mind when you hear the word ocean, the small shift in feeling when you remember a childhood room, the slow, drifting softness that can arrive when you're ready for sleep, all of that depends on this organ. The heart may move blood and the lungs may move air, but the brain turns sensation into experience. It is not only a control centre, it is also the place where the world, as you know it, becomes real. That does not mean, of course, that it is a single tidy switchboard with one wise little operator in a waistcoat pulling levers. The brain is not arranged like that at all. It is a dense living network made of billions of nerve cells called neurons, supported by other cells once dismissed as mere helpers and now known to be deeply important in their own right. These cells form circuits, and those circuits form systems, and those systems together create everything from breathing patterns to language, from balance to emotion, from pain to planning. There is no one place where the whole self sits comfortably with a cup of tea and a clipboard. The brain works because many regions cooperate, each specialised to a degree, yet constantly sharing information. Neurons are the stars most people hear about first, and for good reason. They are excitable cells designed to send signals rapidly across the body and within the brain itself. A neuron receives input through branching structures called dendrites, integrates that information in its cell body, and if the signal is strong enough, fires an electrical impulse down a long extension called an axon. At the end of that axon, chemical messengers known as neurotransmitters are released into tiny gaps called synapses, where they influence the next cell. This means the brain is electrical and chemical at once. It does not think with electricity alone, nor with chemistry alone. It relies on a dance between the two, fast pulses and slower modulators, immediate transmission and broader mood setting shifts. That dance is constantly in motion. Even now, as you sit or lie still, your brain is anything but idle. Regions are monitoring posture, others are processing sound, others are regulating breathing without asking your opinion on the matter. Networks linked with attention may brighten when something catches your interest. Networks linked with memory may quietly stir at familiar ideas. If your mind wanders, and most minds do, another set of regions may become more active, drifting into self-reflection, daydreaming, private rehearsal, or the strange inner cinema that begins to take over as sleep approaches. The brain is never simply on or off, it changes mode. It helps to begin with the broadest level of organisation. The brain is often divided into major regions, each with distinct jobs, though none exist in isolation. The cerebrum is the largest part, the wrinkled outer structure most people picture when they imagine a brain. It is split into two hemispheres and contains the cerebral cortex, a folded outer layer of grey matter involved in higher functions like perception, language, voluntary movement, reasoning, and conscious thought. Beneath and within it lie deeper structures with their own specialised roles. Then there is the cerebellum tucked toward the back, smaller in size but densely packed with neurons and essential for coordination, balance, timing, and the smooth execution of movement. Finally, there is the brain stem, the older and more basic region connecting the brain to the spinal cord, crucial for life itself. It helps regulate breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, swallowing, arousal, and other core survival functions. If the cortex is often where thought becomes elaborate, the brain stem is where life remains non-negotiable. The cortex itself is divided into lobes, each associated with general functions, though again the boundaries are not little office walls with firm rules and personalised mugs. The frontal lobe, located toward the front of the brain, is deeply involved in planning, decision-making, impulse control, personality, and voluntary movement. It helps you weigh options, restrain reactions, organise behaviour, and imagine consequences. It is part of what allows a person to pause before acting, which is occasionally the only thing standing between civilization and complete nonsense. The parietal lobe helps integrate sensory information, especially touch, body position, and spatial awareness. The temporal lobe is central to hearing, memory, language comprehension, and aspects of emotion. The occipital lobe, at the back, is heavily involved in vision. Yet even this neat arrangement is only a starting point, because real thought and behaviour emerge from distributed networks, not isolated boxes. Take vision, for instance. It may begin with the eyes, but what you see is assembled in the brain. Light enters the eye, is focused onto the retina, converted into electrical signals, and sent through the optic nerve. But those signals are not yet sight in the rich human sense. The brain must interpret them. It must detect edges, movement, colour, depth, shape, and meaning. It must compare them with memory. It must decide whether the thing approaching is a harmless shadow, a friend, or the wardrobe in the dark that briefly looked far too committed to being a person. In other words, sensation is not the same as perception. The brain does not passively receive reality. It actively constructs an account of it. The same is true for sound. Vibrations enter the ear, are converted into nerve signals, and then the brain decodes pitch, rhythm, direction, pattern, and speech. Without the brain, sound is not really sound as you know it. It is just incoming data. Meaning arrives later, through interpretation. Language itself depends on remarkable coordination. Certain regions in the left hemisphere, for most people, play major roles in producing and understanding speech. One region helps generate fluent language, another helps interpret it. Damage to one area may leave a person knowing what they want to say but unable to produce the words smoothly. Damage elsewhere may preserve fluent speech but strip it of sense. These patterns reveal something deeply important. The brain is not only where words live, it is where words become connected to meaning, intention, and social life. Memory is another great achievement of the brain, though it is less like a tidy filing cabinet and more like a reconstruction performed each time you remember. New experiences are not simply stamped and shelved. They are encoded, stabilized, linked to emotion, distributed across networks, and later reassembled. The hippocampus, a structure deep in the temporal lobe, plays a crucial role in forming new declarative memories, the kind you can consciously recall, such as facts and events. Without it, new experiences may fail to settle into lasting memory. A person may remain intelligent, conversational, even warm and responsive, yet be unable to build a continuous record of the present. This tells us that memory is not a decorative extra. It is part of continuity, part of identity, part of how the self stretches across time. But memory is not perfect, and in some ways it is not trying to be. The brain is not a camera preserving every detail exactly as it was. That would be far too cumbersome and perhaps emotionally exhausting. Instead, it stores what seems useful, meaningful, repeated, or emotionally charged. It compresses, edits, links, and sometimes distorts. This is why memories can fade, sharpen, or change. It is also why two people can live through the same event and later remember it quite differently. The brain remembers not only what happened, but what mattered, what was noticed, and what fit the larger story it was already building. Emotion, too, is often treated as if it exists separately from the thinking brain, as though feeling was some unruly visitor crashing the rational dinner party. In truth, emotion is built into brain function at a deep level. Structures such as the amygdala, parts of the hypothalamus, areas of the cortex, and many other interconnected regions work together to detect relevance, assess threat, attach significance, and prepare the body to respond. Fear, for example, is not just a feeling floating in the mind. It is a coordinated state. The brain identifies danger, increases arousal, sharpens attention, changes heart rate, alters breathing, and prepares muscles for action. Even before you have consciously decided what you feel, the brain may already be preparing the body to do something about it. This rapid coordination is part of survival. The brain is not only a philosopher, it is also a protector. Some of its most important jobs are immediate and practical. It monitors carbon dioxide levels and adjusts breathing. It helps regulate hunger, thirst, and body temperature. It keeps track of blood pressure and triggers reflexive responses when posture changes. It processes pain, which, unpleasant as it is, serves the vital purpose of warning and protection. It governs sleep and wakefulness through interacting systems that respond to light, internal chemistry, and accumulated sleep pressure. Much of this occurs without conscious control. If you had to manage every breath, every blink, every pressure adjustment manually, life would become unmanageable before breakfast. The hypothalamus deserves special attention here, because though it is small, it is one of the great regulators of bodily balance. Located deep in the brain, it helps coordinate the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system, linking brain activity with hormone release. It plays major roles in hunger, thirst, temperature regulation, stress responses, reproductive functions, and circadian rhythms. It communicates closely with the pituitary gland, which sits just beneath it and releases hormones that influence growth, thyroid activity, adrenal function, and much else. In this sense, the brain does not merely send nerve signals, it also directs chemical messaging across the body. A thought may feel airy and abstract, but the brain's governance is often wonderfully physical. Then there is movement, one of the brain's most visible talents. Voluntary action begins with intention and planning in the cortex, but carrying out even a simple movement requires coordination across many structures. The motor cortex sends signals downward through pathways that eventually reach muscles. The basal ganglia help select and initiate movement, smoothing the transition between intention and action. The cerebellum fine-tunes timing, accuracy, and coordination, comparing intended movement with actual performance and making rapid corrections. This is why a healthy movement feels effortless. It is not effortless at all. It is merely well coordinated. Reaching for a cup, walking across a room, writing your name, maintaining balance while turning your head, all of these require layered control. The cerebellum is especially interesting because for a long time it was discussed mainly as a movement structure, and it certainly is crucial there. But evidence has increasingly shown that it may contribute to cognitive and emotional functions as well. This should not be surprising. The brain is fond of reusing powerful systems in more than one domain. Timing, prediction, and error correction are useful not only in catching a ball, but also in language, planning, and perhaps even social interaction. Biology rarely wastes a good mechanism. Support cells deserve their due as well. For many years, glial cells were treated as the background staff, important perhaps, but hardly glamorous. We now know that this was rather unfair. Astrocytes help maintain the environment around neurons, regulate chemical balance, support blood flow, and contribute to signaling. Oligodendrocytes produce myelin, the fatty insulation that wraps around axons and speeds signal conduction. Microglia act as immune cells within the brain, helping respond to damage and infection while also participating in maintenance and cleanup. In other words, neurons do not perform alone on a brightly lit stage. They rely on an entire supporting cast that keeps the performance possible. Protection is a constant concern because the brain is both essential and delicate. The skull provides rigid shielding. The meninges, layers of connective tissue, surround and protect it further. Cerebrospinal fluid cushions the brain, helps maintain its environment, and allows it to float slightly, reducing the crushing burden of its own weight. There is also the blood-brain barrier, a selective system formed by specialized blood vessels and support cells that limits what can pass from the bloodstream into brain tissue. This barrier is important because the brain requires careful chemical control. Many substances circulating freely elsewhere in the body would be disruptive or dangerous if allowed easy entry into neural tissue. And yet, for all this protection, The brain remains dependent on a steady, uninterrupted supply of oxygen and glucose. Unlike some other tissues, it cannot store much fuel. It is metabolically expensive, consuming a considerable share of the body's energy relative to its size. This tells you something crucial. Thought is not airy magic drifting above the body. It is physical work. A living brain is active tissue with enormous energy demands. This is one reason blood flow matters so much. Interrupt blood supply even briefly and function can fail quickly. Deprive brain tissue longer and cells begin to die. It is a sobering reminder that the organ producing our inner life is also one of our most vulnerable. Sleep offers another window into the brain's priorities. It may seem strange that an organ so concerned with survival would render us unconscious for hours each night, leaving us still and less responsive to the world. Yet sleep is not carelessness. It is maintenance, regulation, integration, and reset. During sleep, brain activity changes pattern. Memories are processed and stabilized. Metabolic waste products may be cleared more efficiently. Hormonal rhythms shift. Emotional balance is supported. Neural systems that have been busy all day move into different kinds of work. The sleeping brain is not inactive. It is occupied with tasks that waking life does not permit as effectively. Dreaming, of course, remains one of the brain's most curious habits. During certain phases of sleep, especially REM sleep, the brain can produce vivid, internally generated experiences, combining memory fragments, emotion, sensation, and narrative in ways that often ignore the ordinary rules of logic. A person may accept impossible events with total sincerity until waking, at which point the absurdity becomes plain. Dreams reveal something profound. The brain is capable of generating worlds from within. It can create scenes, people, tension, movement, even time itself as experienced from the inside. That is not a flaw. It is a clue to the brain's central role in building experience whether awake or asleep. The brain also changes. It is not fixed from birth like a fully written script. It develops, adapts, and reorganizes. This capacity, known as neuroplasticity, allows the brain to learn from experience, strengthen useful pathways, weaken unused ones, and sometimes recover functions after injury by recruiting new circuits. A child learning language is showing neuroplasticity. An adult practicing piano is showing it. A patient recovering after brain damage and slowly retraining movement or speech is showing it too. Plasticity does not mean infinite flexibility, and there are limits, but it does mean that the brain remains responsive to life. Experience leaves marks. This adaptability is one reason habits matter so much. Repeated thought patterns, repeated movements, repeated emotional reactions, repeated skills, all can strengthen certain pathways. The brain becomes more efficient at what it practices. That can be wonderful when learning a language or a craft. It can be less helpful when practicing worry, avoidance, or doom scrolling, until the mind feels like it has been marinated in noise. The brain is always learning what kind of world it seems to inhabit, and what responses appear most necessary. It listens to repetition. Still, for all its complexity, the brain is not a cold machine. Its functions are inseparable from the texture of ordinary life. When you feel comfort, your brain is involved. When you feel grief, your brain is involved. When music moves you, when a familiar smell brings back years in a moment, when panic narrows the world, when laughter loosens it again, when concentration makes time vanish, when exhaustion makes even simple tasks feel steep, the brain is there in every case. It is not separate from feeling. It is one of feeling's great instruments. Perhaps that is why the brain inspires equal parts admiration and humility. It can calculate, imagine, compose, and invent. It can build civilizations and also forget why it opened a browser tab. It can fall in love, develop habits, generate language, predict danger, and occasionally become convinced at 3 a.m. that a minor social mistake has permanently altered history. It is brilliant, but not infallible. It filters reality rather than presenting it raw. It can be biased, anxious, sleepy, overstimulated, optimistic, stubborn, and deeply suggestible. In that sense, it is not just a survival organ. It is the living seat of our wonderfully imperfect humanity, and for all its authority, it cannot sustain life alone. The brain may conduct, but an orchestra still needs air, circulation, fuel, and chemistry. It can send signals to every corner of the body, yet it depends completely on a reliable blood supply arriving moment by moment. No thought continues for long without oxygen. No memory forms without energy. No emotion, no movement, no language, no careful reasoning survives if circulation stops. Which is perhaps why the next organ waiting in the wings feels like such a natural partner to the brain, steady where thought is quick, rhythmic where thought is variable, mechanical in one sense yet deeply bound to everything we feel. Because once the conductor has lifted the baton, something still has to keep life moving through every living tissue, beat after beat. Of all the organs in the body, the heart is perhaps the one that people feel they know best, even when they know very little about what it is actually doing. We feel it speed up when we are frightened, thump harder when we climb stairs, flutter strangely when we are anxious, and ache metaphorically in songs far more often than any respectable anatomical structure has probably earned. It has become a symbol for love, courage, grief, sincerity, and all manner of human drama. But underneath the poetry in the greeting card industry is something even more remarkable. The heart is a muscular pump, yes, but that simple description barely captures the quiet discipline of its life. It begins working before you're born, and if all goes well, it continues without pause for decades, beating through joy, boredom, sleep, illness, exercise, heartbreak, laughter, paperwork, traffic, and the deeply questionable decision to run for a bus after saying you are definitely too tired to exercise. It does not ask whether the day is convenient. It just keeps going. That constancy is easy to miss because a healthy heart is wonderfully unobtrusive. You do not usually stop in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and think, "Excellent, that was another few thousand contractions handled beautifully." Yet that is precisely what is happening. At rest, the average heart beats roughly once every second or so, more when you are active, less when you are deeply relaxed or asleep. Over a single day, that adds up to around 100,000 beats. Over a lifetime, it becomes billions. Each beat is a carefully timed muscular event that sends blood through an enormous branching network of vessels, delivering oxygen, nutrients, hormones, immune cells, and heat to tissues throughout the body, then carrying away carbon dioxide and metabolic waste. The heart is not just moving liquid around like a bored person stirring soup. It is maintaining circulation, pressure, direction, timing, and flow across a living body whose demands are constantly changing. That is the first great thing to understand about the heart. It is not pumping for the sake of pumping. It is pumping because every cell in the body depends on circulation. Cells require oxygen to make energy efficiently. They require nutrients absorbed from food. They produce waste that must be removed. They respond to hormones that travel through the blood. Immune cells need routes to patrol and respond. Heat must be distributed and shed. The bloodstream is not merely a transport service. It is one of the main ways the body remains a coordinated whole. And at the centre of that moving system sits the heart, pushing with enough force to keep life supplied from head to toe. The heart itself is a muscle, but a very specialised one. Its tissue is called cardiac muscle, and unlike the skeletal muscles you use to lift, walk, stretch, or dramatically point at things, cardiac muscle is designed for relentless rhythm rather than voluntary movement. You cannot consciously tell your heart to take the afternoon off, which is probably for the best. Cardiac muscle cells are connected in a way that allows electrical signals to spread efficiently through them, coordinating contraction so that the chambers of the heart squeeze in a useful sequence rather than descending into a sort of muscular panic. The heart must contract powerfully. but it must also relax, refill, and prepare for the next beat. Strength without rhythm would be chaos. Rhythm without strength would be useless. It needs both. If you picture the heart as a simple shape on a diagram, it may seem rather modest, but anatomically it is beautifully organized. It has 4 chambers, 2 upper chambers called atria, and 2 lower chambers called ventricles. The right side of the heart receives blood returning from the body and sends it to the lungs. The left side receives blood returning from the lungs and sends it out to the rest of the body. This arrangement means the heart is really functioning as 2 coordinated pumps joined together. One handles pulmonary circulation, the route between heart and lungs. The other handles systemic circulation, the route between heart and body. These circuits are linked, of course, but they serve different pressure needs. Blood only has to travel a short distance to the lungs, so the right side pumps with lower pressure. The left side must send blood throughout the entire body, including upward to the brain and outward to distant tissues, so it pumps much more forcefully. That is why the muscular wall of the left ventricle is thicker. It has a bigger job. The sequence of blood flow through the heart is orderly, and this order matters enormously. Blood low in oxygen returns from the body through large veins into the right atrium. From there it passes through a valve into the right ventricle. When the right ventricle contracts, blood is pushed through another valve into the pulmonary arteries and sent to the lungs. There carbon dioxide is released and oxygen is taken up. Oxygen-rich blood then returns to the left atrium, passes through another valve into the left ventricle, and when that chamber contracts, blood is driven through the aorta into the systemic circulation. In a few lines it sounds almost too neat, but that neatness is precisely the point. The heart is a structure built for directed flow. It is not enough for blood to move. It must move in the right direction, at the right time, under the right pressure. This is where the valves become wonderfully important. The heart contains 4 valves, each acting like a one-way gateway. They open when pressure conditions favour forward flow and close when pressure would otherwise allow blood to slip backward. These valves do not flap around at random like dramatic curtains in a drafty room. They respond to pressure gradients generated by filling and contraction. The tricuspid valve lies between the right atrium and right ventricle. The pulmonary valve guards the exit from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. The mitral valve lies between the left atrium and left ventricle. The aortic valve guards the exit from the left ventricle into the aorta. Together they help ensure that each squeeze of the heart produces useful movement forward rather than wasteful backflow. The sound people hear as a heartbeat through a stethoscope, that famous lub-dub, is closely tied to valve closure. It is a reminder that rhythm and mechanics are inseparable here, and yet the heart is not merely a mechanical pump in the way a machine in a basement might be. It is living tissue that generates and responds to electricity. Each heartbeat begins with an electrical impulse, and that impulse arises from a specialized group of cells in the right atrium called the sinoatrial node, often described as the heart's natural pacemaker. This is one of those marvelous facts that can seem almost too elegant to be true. The heart does not need the brain to tell it when to beat, 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 beat in some endless conscious loop. It contains its own rhythm generator. The sinoatrial node spontaneously produces electrical signals that spread through the atria, causing them to contract. The signal then reaches another key area, the atrioventricular node, where there is a slight delay. That pause matters. It gives the ventricles a moment to fill more completely before they contract. After that, the electrical signal travels down specialized conduction pathways into the ventricles, triggering a coordinated squeeze from the bottom upward, pushing blood out into the lungs and body. This electrical system is why the heart can continue beating, even when separated from direct nervous system input, at least for a time under the right conditions. The rhythm is intrinsic, but it is also adjustable, and this is where the nervous system comes back into the story. The brain and autonomic nervous system modulate the heart constantly. If you're resting quietly, parasympathetic signals help slow the heart. If you're frightened, exercising, excited, ill, or suddenly aware that you may have sent a message to the wrong person, sympathetic signals can increase heart rate and the force of contraction. Hormones such as adrenaline also influence the heart, so while the heart has its own beat, that beat is always being tuned to circumstance. It is independent, but not isolated. It listens. That listening is essential because the body's needs are never fixed. A body asleep under a blanket has very different circulation demands from a body climbing stairs, lifting weights, speaking in public, or trying to carry too many shopping bags in a single act of optimism. During exercise, muscles need more oxygen and nutrients. Carbon dioxide and other metabolic products must be cleared faster. Blood vessels in active muscles widen. The heart rate rises. Stroke volume, the amount of blood pumped with each beat, often increases too. Cardiac output, the total volume pumped per minute, can rise dramatically. In a trained athlete, the heart may pump far more efficiently than in an untrained person, delivering large amounts of blood with impressive coordination. The heart is not simply beating harder out of enthusiasm. It is responding to an increased demand from the whole body. And the blood itself, of course, is worth admiring in this process. The heart does not create oxygen, nutrients, or immune cells. It moves the medium that carries them. Blood is a complex tissue made of plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, proteins, dissolved substances, signaling molecules, and more. Red blood cells carry oxygen largely bound to hemoglobin, transporting it from the lungs to the tissues. Plasma carries nutrients, hormones, salts, proteins, and wastes. White blood cells contribute to defense. Platelets help with clotting. The heart is meaningful partly because of what it moves. It is like the central engine of a supply network whose cargo is life itself. The coronary circulation adds another lovely layer of irony to the story. The heart pumps blood to the entire body, but heart muscle also needs its own blood supply. It does not simply sip from the stream passing through its chambers. Coronary arteries branch from the aorta just beyond the aortic valve and wrap over the surface of the heart, supplying oxygen and nutrients to the myocardium, the muscular wall of the heart. This matters because the heart is working constantly and has high energy demands. If coronary blood flow is reduced or blocked, heart muscle can become starved of oxygen. That is the basis of a heart attack, where part of the heart muscle is injured because its blood supply is suddenly interrupted. It is one of those cases where the pump's own fuel line becomes the urgent issue. What makes the heart especially fascinating is how finely it balances endurance and vulnerability. On the one hand, it is astonishingly tough. It can beat billions of times over a lifetime. It adapts to long-term exercise by remodeling in ways that can improve function. It responds quickly to changing demands. It is resilient enough to support a body through fevers, stress, pregnancy, growth, emotional surges, and ordinary daily variation. On the other hand, it is not invincible. The same relentless duty that makes it admirable also means it can be worn down or damaged by sustained high blood pressure, poor blood supply, certain infections, electrical disturbances, genetic conditions, toxins, inflammatory disease, or metabolic strain. A healthy heart is powerful, but a struggling heart reveals how much the rest of the body has been relying on it all along. The relationship between the heart and pressure is especially important. Blood pressure is the force exerted by blood against vessel walls, and the heart is a major contributor to it. The vessels themselves and the kidneys also play vital roles. The heart must generate enough pressure to propel blood forward, but chronically excessive pressure can be damaging. High blood pressure increases the workload of the heart, especially the left ventricle, which must push against greater resistance. Over time, this can lead to thickening of the heart muscle and eventually reduced efficiency or heart failure. This is a useful reminder that the heart does not operate alone. Its job depends partly on the condition of the entire vascular system through which it pumps. The vascular system itself is a marvel that helps explain why the heart must be both forceful and controlled. Arteries carry blood away from the heart under relatively high pressure. They branch into smaller arteries and then arterioles, which help regulate flow to different tissues. These lead to capillaries, tiny vessels where exchange with tissues occurs. Oxygen leaves the blood, carbon dioxide enters, nutrients and wastes move across thin walls. Then blood begins the journey back through venules and veins, eventually returning to the heart. Veins operate under lower pressure and often rely on valves and muscle movement to help blood return, especially from the legs. So the heart is the central driver, but circulation is really a collaboration between heart, vessels, blood volume, breathing, muscle activity, and countless regulatory signals. Breathing in particular is closely tied to the heart's work. The heart can only deliver oxygen that the lungs have loaded into the blood. Likewise, carbon dioxide carried back from the tissues can only leave the body through the lungs. The right side of the heart and the lungs are therefore intimate partners. The heart sends blood to the lungs to be refreshed, and the lungs return it ready for delivery. This means every heartbeat is linked, in a very literal way, to every breath. Even small shifts in breathing can influence heart function. During inhalation and exhalation, pressure changes within the chest affect venous return and subtly alter heart dynamics. In healthy people, heart rate itself often varies slightly with breathing, speeding a bit on inhalation and slowing on exhalation. Far from being rigid and mechanical, the healthy heart has a degree of responsive variation that reflects its deep integration with the rest of the body. This connection also helps explain why emotion so often announces itself through the heart. Strictly speaking, your feelings are not stored in the chambers of the heart like little folded notes, but emotion changes heart function rapidly enough that people naturally experience the heart as part of feeling. Anxiety can cause pounding, racing, or skipped sensations. Relief can bring a sense of slowing and release. Grief may feel heavy in the chest. Excitement may bring a thrilling quickness. Love, nerves, fear, embarrassment, anticipation all can produce bodily states that include unmistakable cardiac changes. The heart is not the origin of emotion, but it is one of emotion's most noticeable messengers. Perhaps that is why people have been assigning it poetic responsibilities for centuries. Biology did not invent metaphor, but it certainly gave metaphor some strong material. There is also something quietly moving about the heart's development. It is among the earliest organs to begin functioning in the embryo, starting as a simple tube and gradually folding, partitioning and refining into the four-chambered pump of later life. Before there are thoughts as we usually understand them, before there is speech, memory or self-awareness, there is circulation beginning. This early start speaks to priority. A growing body needs transport, supply, exchange. Life begins organizing movement long before it begins organizing conversation. The heart's reliability also shapes daily life in ways people rarely notice. When you stand up, circulation has to adjust quickly so blood pressure to the brain remains adequate. When you become overheated, the heart helps increase blood flow to the skin so heat can be lost. When you are dehydrated, blood volume changes, and the heart must work within a tighter margin. During illness, fever, stress, and inflammation can all raise its workload. During digestion, blood flow patterns shift toward the organs dealing with food. During sleep, heart rate and pressure often fall. Through all of this, the heart is not improvising wildly. It is participating in ongoing homeostasis, moment by moment adjusting to help preserve stable internal conditions. And perhaps that is the best way to think of it. Not as a romantic icon, not as a mere pump, but as a tireless organ of distribution and adaptation. It keeps the body connected to itself. It ensures that no tissue becomes too isolated from the shared flow of oxygen and nutrients. It supports motion, thought, repair, defense, and rest. Without its rhythm, the brain falls silent, the muscles weaken, the kidneys cease filtering, the liver ceases processing, the gut ceases absorbing. The heart is not a glamorous soloist keeping the spotlight for itself. It is the central engine of cooperation. A well-working heart also teaches an important biological lesson. Life depends not only on force, but on timing and coordination. The atria must contract before the ventricles. Valves must open and close at the right moments. Electrical impulses must travel in sequence. Pressure must rise and fall in usable patterns. Blood must be sent where it is needed and returned for renewal. It is not enough for the heart to be strong, it must be orderly. In that sense, it resembles much of physiology. The body rarely rewards chaos, however enthusiastic. Still, there is room for wonder in the plainness of its task. Right now, without applause, without your direct command, your heart is contracting and relaxing, filling and ejecting, sustaining gradients, pressures and pathways. It is moving blood up to the brain that is hearing these words, down to the abdomen where digestion and filtration continue, out to the skin, into the muscles, through vessels so fine that red blood cells sometimes pass in single file. It is doing this in darkness, in silence, inside a chest that rises and falls with breath, and that breath matters more than any heart could manage alone, because no matter how faithful the pump may be, it still needs the blood it sends to be loaded with oxygen and relieved of carbon dioxide, which means the next part of the story belongs naturally to the organs that sit beside the heart in the chest, expanding and settling, turning air into something the bloodstream can carry onward. If the heart is the steady pump that keeps blood moving, the lungs are the place where that moving blood comes to be changed. They sit in the chest with a kind of quiet authority, soft but expansive, delicate in texture but absolutely central to survival. They do not beat or churn or squeeze in the dramatic way some organs do. Instead, they expand, recoil, exchange and repeat. In and out, day and night, whether you are speaking, sleeping, climbing stairs, reading, worrying, laughing, or trying to pretend that carrying laundry up one flight of stairs does not count as cardio. The lungs are less noisy than the heart and less celebrated than the brain, but their work is just as constant. Every moment they're taking something from the outside world, drawing it inward, and turning it into a usable gift for the bloodstream. That is one of the strangest and most important facts about being alive. You are never completely separate from your surroundings. With every breath, the boundary between body and world becomes porous. Air from outside enters passages in your face and throat, travels down into branching tubes, reaches tiny sacs deep in the lungs, and there, across walls so thin they seem almost implausible, gases are exchanged between air and blood. Oxygen enters, carbon dioxide leaves. What was outside becomes part of your inner chemistry. What was waste from your cells is carried out and returned to the air. Breathing is not simply movement, it is exchange, relationship and renewal. People often imagine the lungs as two empty bags that fill and empty like balloons, but real lungs are much more intricate than that. They are spongy, branching, highly vascular organs built for maximum surface area. If you could unfold all the tiny air sacs within them, the total area available for gas exchange would be enormous, far greater than the modest size of the chest would suggest. This is one of biology's favourite tricks, folding a great deal of functional surface into a compact space. The intestines do it for absorption, the brain does it with its cortex, the lungs do it for breathing. They turn the chest into an internal forest of branching pathways, ending in delicate leaves of exchange. Air begins its journey through the nose or mouth, and even here the body is already being careful. The nose is not only decorative, though it does its best. It warms, humidifies, and filters incoming air. Tiny hairs and mucus help trap particles. The winding structure of the nasal passages slows and conditions the air before it moves deeper. Breathing through the mouth can still get air in, of course, especially when speed matters. But the nose is the more refined entrance, the body's preferred front door for ordinary use. From there, air passes through the pharynx and larynx, travels down the trachea and enters the branching bronchial tree. The trachea is held open by rings of cartilage, which is fortunate because a collapsed windpipe would make the entire business rather awkward. The branching pattern of the airways is one of the great pieces of internal engineering. The trachea divides into the right and left main bronchi, one for each lung. These divide again and again into smaller bronchi and then bronchioles, narrowing like tree branches as they spread through lung tissue. This repeated branching allows air to be distributed widely and efficiently. By the time the pathways reach their smallest ends, they open into clusters of alveoli, the tiny air sacs where gas exchange actually occurs. This means most of the lung is not devoted to moving air in the broad sense. It is devoted to presenting a vast thin interface between air and blood. The alveoli are where the real magic happens, though calling it magic is unfair to the astonishing precision of the biology involved. Each alveolus is a tiny pouch, lined by a thin layer of cells, and wrapped in capillaries so small and so numerous that blood is brought extraordinarily close to the air inside. Oxygen moves from the alveolar air into the blood because of differences in concentration, diffusing across a very thin membrane. Carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction, leaving the blood and entering the alveolus to be exhaled. No little hands are carrying molecules one by one. No dramatic fanfare announces their crossing. It happens because the structures are built to make it happen efficiently, moment after moment in silence. This thinness is critical. Gas exchange must be fast because blood does not linger in the pulmonary capillaries for long, especially during exercise when circulation speeds up. Oxygen needs to move quickly into red blood cells, where it binds to hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide needs to move out. So the respiratory membrane, the barrier between alveolar air and blood, is incredibly delicate. Thin enough for diffusion, yet stable enough to survive years of continuous breathing. That balance is one reason the lungs are both marvellous and vulnerable. They must remain open to the outside world to do their job, but openness always brings some risk. The lungs do not work alone, of course. They depend on the chest wall, the diaphragm, the nervous system, the bloodstream, and the chemistry of the body as a whole. Breathing is not caused by the lungs actively sucking in air the way a person drinks through a straw. Instead, breathing depends on pressure changes created by movement. The diaphragm, a broad dome-shaped muscle beneath the lungs, is the star of ordinary breathing. When it contracts, it flattens and moves downward, increasing the volume of the chest cavity. The external intercostal muscles between the ribs also help lift and expand the chest. As the thoracic cavity expands, pressure inside drops slightly below atmospheric pressure and air flows in. When the diaphragm relaxes, the lungs and chest recoil, volume decreases, pressure rises, and air flows out. In quiet breathing, exhalation is usually passive, relying mostly on elastic recoil. So breathing is a little less like pulling air in, and more like creating the conditions that allow air to enter. That elastic recoil matters a great deal. Lung tissue contains fibres that help it spring back after expansion, and the alveoli themselves are lined with a substance called surfactant that reduces surface tension. Without surfactant, the tiny air sacs would be much more likely to collapse, making breathing vastly harder. It is one of those substances people rarely think about, and yet it is absolutely essential. Newborn infants born too early can struggle because their lungs may not yet produce enough surfactant, revealing just how important this invisible coating is. The body is full of such humble triumphs, molecular details doing enormous jobs without publicity. Each lung is wrapped in a thin membrane called the pleura. One layer covers the lung itself, and another lines the inside of the chest wall, with a small lubricated space between them. This arrangement allows the lungs to glide smoothly as they expand and contract, while also helping them remain coupled to the movements of the chest wall. If air enters that pleural space unexpectedly, as in a collapsed lung, the normal pressure relationship is disrupted and the lung may recoil inward. Again, the lesson is that breathing depends on structure as much as on muscle. The lungs work because anatomy, physics and chemistry are cooperating continuously. It is tempting to think of oxygen as the hero of the story and carbon dioxide as the tedious villain rushing out the back door. But carbon dioxide is far more interesting than that. It is a waste product of metabolism, yes, produced when cells use oxygen to help generate energy, but it also plays a major role in regulating breathing and blood chemistry. In fact, the urge to breathe is driven strongly by carbon dioxide levels. As carbon dioxide rises in the blood, it affects pH, making the blood more acidic. Specialized sensors detect this and signal the brainstem to increase breathing. Oxygen matters profoundly, but under normal conditions it is often the rising carbon dioxide that the body monitors most urgently when deciding how much ventilation is needed. This is why holding your breath becomes increasingly uncomfortable. It is not merely a dramatic personal struggle against airlessness. It is chemistry insisting on being respected. The brainstem, particularly regions in the medulla and pons, plays a central role in controlling breathing rhythm. This is another beautiful example of how the body blends automatic function with flexibility. You do not usually have to think about breathing. The brainstem generates rhythmic signals that drive the respiratory muscles, keeping the pattern going through sleep and distraction, and the rest of ordinary life. Yet breathing can also be modified voluntarily. You can hold your breath briefly, sigh, sing, speak, blow out candles, yawn, laugh, or deliberately slow your breathing to calm yourself. In other words, breathing lives at a fascinating border between the automatic and the voluntary. Few bodily functions are so continuously essential and yet so available to conscious influence. That partly explains why breathing is so tied to emotion. Fear can make breathing fast and shallow. Grief can bring sobbing. Relief may arrive as a long exhale. Anxiety often makes people more aware of breathing, sometimes in an unpleasant loop where attention itself seems to make the breathing feel less natural. Calm breathing, slow and steady, can nudge the nervous system toward a more settled state. The lungs are not where emotion begins, but breathing is one of the fastest ways emotion becomes physical. A body under stress breathes differently from a body at rest, and the reverse can be true as well. Change the breathing, and you may change the feeling. Not always dramatically, not as a cure for every human difficulty, but enough that nearly every culture eventually noticed. The partnership between the lungs and the heart is especially intimate. The right side of the heart sends blood to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. In the capillaries around the alveoli, that blood releases carbon dioxide and takes up oxygen. It then returns through the pulmonary veins to the left side of the heart, ready to be pumped out to the body. The lungs, then, are not just passive bellows. They are the place where blood is renewed for its next circuit. Every heartbeat toward the body depends on what happened a moment earlier in the lungs. Every thought in the brain, every movement of muscle, every bit of liver chemistry or kidney filtration depends on oxygen being loaded efficiently into the blood here first. And this loading is impressively well matched to the body's needs. During exercise, breathing rate and depth increase. More air reaches the alveoli, more oxygen is available, and more carbon dioxide can be removed. Blood flow through the lungs increases as cardiac output rises. In healthy lungs, the system has a significant reserve. You can sit quietly for hours with gentle breathing, then begin moving vigorously and the lungs can scale up. The breathing may feel dramatic to you, especially if your chosen exercise involves hills and regret, but the lungs are doing exactly what they were built to do. Their capacity to respond is part of what makes physical activity possible at all. The lungs also help with more than gas exchange. They play roles in filtering small clots or debris from the circulation. They participate in immune defense, and they help regulate blood chemistry by controlling carbon dioxide levels. They also make speech possible. Air pushed out from the lungs passes through the larynx, where vocal cords vibrate and create sound. So the lungs are quietly present not only in survival, but in conversation, singing, whispering, laughing, crying, reading aloud, and all the other ways humans insist on turning breath into meaning. A sentence is, in one sense, shaped air supported by the lungs. Because the lungs are open to the outside world, defense is a constant priority. Every breath brings not only oxygen, but also particles, microbes, irritants, and occasional reminders that city air and dusty rooms are not always ideal companions. The airways are lined with mucus that traps unwanted material, and tiny hair-like structures called cilia help sweep that mucus upward toward the throat, where it can be swallowed or expelled. It is an elegant moving carpet of housekeeping, continuously cleaning the respiratory tract without making a fuss. Immune cells patrol as well, including alveolar macrophages that help remove debris and microbes reaching deep into the lungs. This defensive work is easy to overlook until it is overwhelmed, as in infection, heavy smoke exposure, or chronic inflammation. When lung function is impaired, the effect can be immediate and unsettling because breathing is not something the body can postpone. Conditions like asthma narrow the airways and make it harder to move air. Pneumonia fills parts of the lungs with inflammatory fluid, reducing gas exchange. Chronic smoking can damage airways and alveoli, gradually reducing the lungs' efficiency and recoil. Fibrotic diseases can stiffen the lungs. Blood clots can obstruct pulmonary circulation. Each of these reveals the same principle from a different angle. The lungs depend on open airways, thin membranes, good blood flow, flexible tissue, and coordinated breathing mechanics. Disturb any of these too much, and the whole body feels it quickly. A struggling lung is rarely a private problem. It becomes everyone's problem, from brain to muscle to heart. And yet, when healthy, the lungs are wonderfully easy to ignore. Most people spend much of their lives breathing without gratitude, commentary, or applause. There is something almost generous about that. The lungs do their work without demanding attention. They expand, exchange, recoil, repeat. During sleep, they continue faithfully, even as conscious awareness recedes. During conversation, they lend us air for words. During rest, they maintain the quiet oxygenation of tissues that are still very much alive. Even a sigh, that simple longer exhalation, can help re-expand small collapsed areas of lung and reset breathing patterns slightly. The body builds little maintenance moments into ordinary life. It is also worth admiring the sheer physical presence of the lungs in the chest. They occupy most of the thoracic cavity, one on each side of the heart, shaped slightly differently because the heart itself leans leftward and takes up space. The right lung has 3 lobes, the left 2. This asymmetry is not a mistake, it is accommodation, anatomy making room for anatomy. Bodies are full of these negotiated arrangements, structures sharing limited space with impressive civility. The lungs sit high beneath the ribs, protected but mobile, in constant motion but usually unnoticed. Perhaps that is why the metaphor of a breathing forest suits them so well, even if one keeps both feet firmly on the ground and resists getting too dreamy about it. They branch, they spread, they present countless tiny surfaces to the moving air. They quietly trade one gas for another, and in doing so sustain everything that follows. They are not loud organs, they are not theatrical, but they are always participating in that essential bargain between organism and atmosphere. The body offers carbon dioxide, the air offers oxygen, the lungs make the exchange possible. There is a humbling thought in that arrangement. Every cell in your body depends, in some indirect but real way, on the fact that the world around you contains breathable air and that these organs can access it. Life on land is not a sealed performance. It is a continuous interaction with an invisible environment. The lungs remind us of that with every breath. They take the outside in, alter the blood, and send that altered blood back to the heart, ready for circulation. Breath becomes bloodstream, air becomes energy, the outside becomes usable inside, and still, oxygen is only part of what cells need. Freshly oxygenated blood leaving the lungs will return to the heart, be pumped out to the tissues, and arrive not just at the brain and muscles, but also at an organ waiting lower in the body with a very different kind of intelligence. Because once oxygen is delivered, and nutrients arrive from the gut, someone has to sort them, store them, transform them, detoxify the unwanted parts, and keep the chemical traffic of the body from becoming complete disorder. Which leads naturally to the patient, tireless chemist tucked under the ribs on the right side of the abdomen. If the lungs are where the blood comes to be refreshed with oxygen, the liver is where much of that newly supplied blood arrives to be sorted, processed, stored, altered, and quietly brought into order. It sits beneath the ribs on the right side of the upper abdomen, broad and substantial, a little heavier and more industrious than most people imagine when they picture it, which admittedly is not often unless they are reading labels, regretting a second helping, or hearing stern advice about alcohol from a doctor or a relative who has suddenly become very interested in wellness. Yet the liver deserves far more attention than it usually gets. It is one of the busiest organs in the body, one of the most versatile, and one of the clearest examples of how survival depends not only on getting useful things into the body, but also on transforming, storing, balancing, neutralizing, and cleaning them afterward. The liver is often described as a chemical factory, and that comparison is not wrong, though it sounds a bit industrial for something so alive and so subtle. It is more like a patient chemist, warehouse manager, sanitation department, and customs office all rolled into one dense reddish-brown organ. Blood arrives carrying nutrients from the digestive tract, hormones from glands, waste from tissues, drugs from the outside world, and byproducts of ordinary metabolism. The liver receives much of this traffic and decides in effect what is useful, what is dangerous, what must be stored for later, what must be modified, what must be excreted, and what must be sent back into circulation in a different form. It does this continuously, without fanfare, and usually without you noticing at all. That last point is worth lingering on. The liver is so good at being quiet that most people know almost nothing about it, unless they are taught anatomy or confronted with illness. A heart announces itself with every beat. Lungs can be felt with every breath. A stomach can complain rather dramatically if ignored or overloaded. The liver, by contrast, tends to work in dignified silence. It does not demand that you admire its craftsmanship, even though it is performing hundreds of essential functions every day. It simply gets on with the job, sorting the chemistry of your life with the steady patience of an expert who has seen everything and still shows up on time. Anatomically, the liver is the largest internal organ, unless one counts the skin, which usually prefers to be treated as something rather more external. It is divided into lobes and made up of countless repeating functional units supplied by a rich network of blood vessels. What makes its blood supply especially interesting is that it receives blood from two major sources. One is the hepatic artery, which brings oxygen-rich blood from the heart like other organs receive. The other is the portal vein, which brings nutrient-rich blood directly from the digestive organs, especially the intestines. This means that after you eat, much of what is absorbed from your food does not head straight into general circulation. It goes first to the liver. The liver gets the first look. It is, in a very real sense, the body's first major processing centre for what comes in from the gut. This arrangement tells you something important about the liver's role. Digestion is not merely about breaking food down and absorbing it. It is also about deciding what to do with the absorbed materials. Glucose, amino acids, lipids, vitamins, minerals, and countless other molecules enter the bloodstream from the intestines, but raw arrival is only the beginning. Some substances need to be stored. Some need to be released gradually. Some need to be converted into forms the body can use more effectively. Some need to be packaged into proteins or lipoproteins for transport. Some need to be detoxified because the outside world, generous though it may be with oxygen, is not always careful about what else it includes in our meals, medications, and questionable life choices. The liver sits at this intersection between absorption and action. Take glucose, for instance. After a meal, blood glucose levels rise as carbohydrates are broken down and absorbed. Glucose is valuable. Cells need it. particularly the brain under ordinary circumstances, but too much glucose circulating freely for too long is harmful, so the body regulates it carefully, and the liver is central to that regulation. Under the influence of insulin, the liver can take up glucose from the blood and store it in the form of glycogen, a branched carbohydrate reserve. Later, when blood glucose begins to fall, the liver can break glycogen back down and release glucose into the bloodstream, helping keep levels within a useful range. It can also create new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources in a process called gluconeogenesis, especially during fasting. In other words, the liver is not only a warehouse, it is also a strategic reserve manager, smoothing out the body's fuel supply over time. This is one reason the liver matters so much between meals, during sleep, and in fasting states. While you're not eating, tissues still need fuel. The brain still functions, the heart still beats, the kidneys still filter, the lungs still ventilate. The body does not simply wait politely for breakfast. The liver helps bridge the gap, releasing stored glucose and maintaining metabolic stability. It is a wonderful reminder that health depends not just on intake, but on regulation over time. You're not alive because food exists. You're alive because organs like the liver know what to do with it after it arrives. Lipids tell a similar story. Fats are energy-rich molecules, but they are hydrophobic, which means they do not mix easily with water-based blood, so the body requires careful systems for transporting and processing them. The liver helps synthesize cholesterol, package lipids into lipoproteins, and regulate fat metabolism more broadly. It can convert excess carbohydrate into fat when energy intake surpasses immediate need. It can also participate in the breakdown and redistribution of fat-related molecules during fasting or prolonged exercise. Cholesterol itself often gets a rather poor reputation in casual conversation, but biologically it is essential. It is a structural component of cell membranes and a precursor for steroid hormones and bile acids. The liver's job is not to demonize molecules, it is to manage them. Protein metabolism is another major task. Amino acids absorbed from the gut are useful for building proteins, enzymes, transport molecules, hormones, immune components, and countless structural and functional elements of life. But amino acids contain nitrogen, and nitrogen disposal becomes important when amino acids are broken down. The liver handles this elegantly through the urea cycle, converting toxic ammonia into urea, a less dangerous compound that can be carried in the blood to the kidneys and excreted in urine. This is one of those astonishingly practical pieces of chemistry that keeps life possible without much celebration. The body uses amino acids for what it needs, but when excess nitrogen appears, the liver turns a potentially dangerous waste into something manageable and sends it onward for disposal. That partnership with the kidneys is worth noting. The liver and kidneys are frequent collaborators. The liver transforms many compounds into forms that are easier to excrete, while the kidneys handle the final filtering and removal of many of those products from the blood. When biology works well, one organ's processing becomes another organ's manageable task. This kind of cooperation runs all through physiology. No organ is truly an island, however self-important its fan club may be. Perhaps the liver's most famous role in public imagination is detoxification, and here the truth is both less dramatic and more impressive than popular language often suggests. The liver does not operate like a mystical cleansing sponge waiting to rescue a person after a week of poor judgment and fluorescent beverages. It performs specific biochemical transformations on drugs, toxins, metabolic byproducts, alcohol, and other substances. Liver cells contain enzyme systems, especially those associated with the cytochrome P450 family, that modify chemicals in ways that often make them easier to eliminate. Some compounds are made more water-soluble, some are inactivated, some are converted into less harmful forms. Occasionally, rather inconveniently, an intermediate product may be temporarily more reactive or damaging before further processing renders it safer. Detoxification is real, but it is technical, continuous, and not especially interested in marketing slogans. Alcohol offers a well-known example. When alcohol enters the body, the liver helps metabolize it using enzymes such as alcohol dehydrogenase and aldehyde dehydrogenase. Ethanol is converted first to acetaldehyde, which is toxic, and then to acetate, which can be further processed. This is not a sign that the liver enjoys being handed cocktails as a hobby. It is simply dealing with what arrives. The problem is that repeated heavy exposure can overwhelm or injure liver cells, leading over time to inflammation, fat accumulation, fibrosis, cirrhosis, and impaired function. The liver is resilient, but it is not infinitely forgiving. Much of medicine is, in one form or another, the study of what happens when a capable organ is asked to compensate beyond reason. The liver also produces bile, which is one of its great underappreciated contributions to digestion. Bile is a fluid containing bile acids, pigments, cholesterol, and other substances. It is produced by liver cells and either sent directly into the small intestine or stored and concentrated in the gallbladder for later release. Its key digestive role is to help emulsify fats in the intestine, breaking large fat droplets into smaller ones so digestive enzymes can work more effectively. Without bile, fat digestion and absorption become much more difficult. Again, the liver's intelligence shows up in chemistry. Fat is useful but difficult to handle in a watery environment, so the body produces a detergent-like solution and sends it exactly where needed. Not glamorous perhaps, but tremendously clever. The pigments in bile lead to another of the liver's housekeeping duties, dealing with old red blood cells. Red blood cells do not live forever. After circulating for about 4 months on average, aging cells are broken down, largely by macrophages in the spleen and liver. Hemoglobin is dismantled, iron is recycled. The heme portion is converted into bilirubin, which the liver takes up, modifies, and excretes into bile. Some of this ends up leaving the body through the intestines, contributing to the ordinary colour of stool. If bilirubin accumulates instead of being processed and excreted properly, jaundice can result, turning skin and eyes yellow. It is a vivid sign that the liver's waste handling role is just as important as its storage and synthesis work. Synthesis, in fact, is one of the liver's grandest specialties. It produces many essential proteins that circulate in the blood. Among these is albumin, a protein that helps maintain oncotic pressure, keeping fluid in the bloodstream rather than letting it leak excessively into tissues. Albumin also transports various substances. The liver also synthesizes many clotting factors, proteins necessary for normal blood clot formation. This means the liver helps keep blood both fluid and prepared. Too little clotting, and bleeding becomes dangerous. Too much clotting, and circulation itself is threatened. The liver contributes to the delicate balance by supplying key ingredients for the system. When liver function is impaired, this balance can falter, revealing how central the organ really was all along. Another striking feature of the liver is its regenerative capacity. Among major organs, it has an unusual ability to regrow after injury or partial removal, provided enough healthy tissue remains and the damage is not ongoing or overwhelming. This does not mean it is indestructible, nor does it mean one should behave as though the liver were a mythical creature that thrives on abuse. But it does mean the liver has remarkable restorative powers. That capacity tells us something important about its evolutionary value. An organ handling constant chemical exposure, variable diets, occasional toxins, and the metabolic traffic of an entire body benefits greatly from being able to repair and rebuild. The microscopic structure of the liver reveals how well designed it is for its work. Blood from the hepatic artery and portal vein flows through channels called sinusoids, where it comes into close contact with liver cells, or hepatocytes. These hepatocytes are the main functional workers of the liver, carrying out metabolism, synthesis, detoxification, and bile production. The arrangement allows incoming blood to be sampled, altered, and managed efficiently. It is not a random wash of fluid over tissue. It is a carefully arranged system that maximizes interaction between blood and cells while maintaining flow onward to the hepatic veins and back toward the heart. Once again, anatomy is strategy. The liver is also a key hormonal partner, even if it does not always receive credit for the social side of endocrinology. It helps metabolize and clear hormones from circulation, which means it influences how long signals persist in the body. It also responds to hormones such as insulin and glucagon in regulating fuel storage and release. It produces molecules involved in growth and other signaling pathways. In effect, it is both a target and a participant in the chemical conversations of the body. Hormones may be the letters, but the liver is one of the places deciding how the mail is handled. Vitamins and minerals pass through its care as well. The liver stores vitamins such as A, D, B12 and K in meaningful amounts, along with minerals like iron and copper. This storage function provides a buffer against short-term fluctuations in intake. If the body had to depend strictly on the last meal for every essential nutrient, existence would become a rather stressful series of dietary emergencies. Instead, the liver helps create reserves. It is, in that sense, one of the organs that protects tomorrow from the unpredictability of today. When things go wrong in the liver, the effects can ripple widely because its responsibilities are so broad. A damaged liver may struggle to regulate glucose, synthesize proteins, process bilirubin, produce bile, detoxify compounds, manage hormones, or maintain fluid balance. Fat may accumulate in liver cells, particularly with obesity, insulin resistance, and certain dietary patterns, leading to fatty liver disease. Inflammation may follow, scarring may build over time. In severe cirrhosis, normal liver architecture is replaced by fibrous tissue and nodules, impairing blood flow and function. Because so much blood normally passes through the liver, this scarring can also raise pressure in the portal venous system, leading to complications elsewhere. Once more, the body reminds us that organs do not fail privately, they fail relationally, and still, a healthy liver carries on with astonishing patience. After meals, it sorts incoming nutrients. Between meals, it helps supply glucose. All day, it synthesizes proteins, modifies chemicals, produces bile, handles bilirubin, stores vitamins, processes lipids, and transforms ammonia into urea. It never seems to tire of chemistry. If the heart is rhythm and the lungs are exchange, the liver is transformation. It takes the raw, the excessive, the toxic, the useful, the temporary, and the worn out, and turns them into forms the body can live with. There is something deeply calming in that picture. The liver does not rush. It does not dramatize. It works through method. A molecule arrives, and the liver asks what must be done. Must it be stored? Must it be altered? Must it be neutralized? Must it be packed for transport? Must it be sent into bile? Must it be released into the blood? The liver is less concerned with excitement than with order, and the body benefits enormously from that temperament. A person can spend an entire day scarcely aware of the organ's existence, while it quietly saves them from chemical chaos. It also stands at a beautiful crossroads in the body's story. Blood arriving from the intestines carries the results of digestion. Blood leaving the liver carries altered fuels, proteins, and processed substances to the rest of the body. Waste products generated elsewhere may come back for handling. Bile produced here goes outward again to assist digestion. The liver is not only doing its own work, it is translating between systems, making nutrients usable, making toxins less dangerous, making waste transport possible, and making stored fuel available when needed. It is one of the body's great interpreters, and yet for all its breadth of function, the liver still depends on others to complete the story. It can turn ammonia into urea, but someone must remove that urea from the blood. It can process water-soluble wastes and help regulate fluid chemistry, but someone else must filter the blood continuously and decide what stays, what leaves, how much water to conserve, how much salt to return, and how pressure itself should be adjusted minute by minute. which is why, after spending time with this patient chemist beneath the ribs, it feels natural to move to the paired organs farther back in the abdomen, quiet, precise, and endlessly discriminating in what they let go. Tucked high toward the back of the abdomen, one on either side of the spine, the kidneys tend to live a rather thankless existence in the public imagination. They are not as glamorous as the heart, not as romanticized as the brain, and not nearly as likely to appear in poetry unless something has gone very wrong with the rhyme scheme. Most people know vaguely that kidneys have something to do with urine, which is true in the same way saying a library has something to do with books is true, accurate certainly, but nowhere near enough to explain the scale of the work involved. The kidneys are among the most precise and disciplined organs in the body. They do not merely make urine, they filter the blood, regulate fluid balance, control electrolyte levels, help manage blood pressure, contribute to acid-base balance, support red blood cell production through hormone signaling, and ensure that the chemistry of the internal environment remains stable enough for every other organ to do its job without descending into confusion. That last point is worth dwelling on, because the kidneys are a wonderful example of how life depends on quiet correction. The body is always changing. You drink more or less water, you eat salty food, you sweat in the heat, you sleep through the night without drinking, you exercise, you get stressed, you bleed a little from a cut, you recover from an illness, cells use nutrients and release wastes, acids are produced in metabolism, electrolytes shift between compartments. Blood pressure rises and falls with posture, movement and hydration. If all these changes were simply allowed to accumulate without adjustment, the internal environment would drift steadily away from the narrow conditions that cells require. The kidneys are part of the system that prevents that drift. They are not there for dramatic rescues alone. They are there for constant maintenance. In many ways, the kidneys are the body's quiet accountants. They keep track of what is in the blood, what should remain, what can be discarded, what must be conserved, and what balance must be restored before trouble begins. This work is almost entirely invisible in everyday life, which perhaps explains why it is so easy to overlook. A healthy kidney does not announce that it has decided to reclaim sodium, excrete excess water, hold on to bicarbonate, release a hormone, or adjust blood volume. It simply carries out thousands upon thousands of tiny decisions every minute, each rooted in the chemistry of the moment and the needs of the whole body. The first thing to understand is that the kidneys receive a remarkable amount of blood flow. Though they are not especially large compared with some other organs, they are richly supplied because filtration is one of their central tasks. Blood enters each kidney through a renal artery, branches into smaller vessels, and is directed toward vast numbers of microscopic filtering units called nephrons. Each kidney contains around 1 million nephrons, and each nephron is a beautifully structured little system capable of filtering fluid, selectively reclaiming needed substances, secreting others, and helping produce the final composition of urine. The kidneys are, in effect, packed with tiny processing lines, each doing its part in the great labour of chemical balance. A nephron begins with a structure called the glomerulus, a tuft of capillaries enclosed within Bowman's capsule. Blood pressure pushes water and small dissolved substances out of the glomerular capillaries and into this capsule, creating a filtrate that resembles blood plasma minus cells and most large proteins. This is the first crucial move. The kidneys do not begin by carefully selecting only the bad things and leaving everything useful behind. That would be far too cumbersome. Instead, they filter broadly. Water, salts, glucose, amino acids, urea, and many other small molecules pass into the filtrate. Blood cells and most plasma proteins remain in the bloodstream. From there, the nephron begins the more refined task of deciding what to take back. This approach, broad filtration followed by selective reabsorption, is one of the kidney's great achievements. It allows the body to process an enormous volume of fluid with remarkable flexibility. Useful substances that should not be lost, such as glucose under ordinary healthy conditions, are reabsorbed. Appropriate amounts of sodium, potassium, calcium, bicarbonate, and water are reclaimed according to need. Other substances are left behind for excretion or are actively secreted into the tubular fluid. By the time the fluid reaches the end of the nephron, it has been transformed from a general filtrate into urine, carrying away wastes and excesses while preserving what the body still needs. The nephron itself is a long and specialised tube with different segments performing different jobs. After Bowman's capsule comes the proximal tubule, a region that reabsorbs a large portion of the filtered water and salts, along with essentially all of the filtered glucose and amino acids in healthy conditions. It is a busy and generous section, taking back much of what was filtered in the first place. Farther along lies the loop of Henle, which dips down into the kidney's inner region and then rises again. This structure is critical for creating the concentration gradient that allows the kidneys to produce either dilute or concentrated urine depending on the body's needs. Then comes the distal tubule and the collecting duct, where fine adjustments take place under hormonal control. These later sections are especially important in determining the final balance of water, sodium, potassium, and acid-base status. That ability to adjust urine concentration is one of the kidney's most elegant powers. Imagine a hot day when you have been sweating heavily and drinking very little. Water is being lost from the body, and preserving what remains becomes important. In response, hormones such as antidiuretic hormone, often called ADH, help the kidneys reabsorb more water, producing smaller volumes of more concentrated urine. Now imagine the opposite situation. You drink a great deal of water in a short time. The body does not need to cling to all of it, so the kidneys can allow more water to remain in the filtrate, producing a larger volume of more dilute urine. This is not random. It is a dynamic response to the body's state. The kidneys are constantly asking, in effect, how much water can be spared and how much must be kept. Sodium deserves special mention because it is one of the key ions shaping fluid balance. Water tends to follow sodium, and the amount of sodium retained by the kidneys helps influence blood volume and therefore blood pressure. When the body needs to conserve sodium, hormones such as aldosterone encourage the kidneys to reabsorb more of it, often with water following along. When sodium is excessive, more can be excreted. This means the kidneys are deeply involved in volume control. They do not simply remove waste from the blood and step aside. They help determine how full the vascular system is, how much fluid remains in circulation, and how much pressure the heart and vessels must manage. This leads naturally to blood pressure, a subject in which the kidneys have a far greater stake than many people realize. Blood pressure is influenced by the heart, the blood vessels, blood volume, and several hormonal systems, and the kidneys participate in all of this. They monitor blood flow and pressure reaching them, and when they sense that pressure is too low, they can release an enzyme called renin. Renin helps activate a hormonal cascade known as the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. This system can cause blood vessels to constrict and encourage the retention of sodium and water, both of which help raise blood pressure. In other words, the kidneys are not passive observers of circulation. They're active regulators, capable of nudging the entire cardiovascular system toward a new balance. There is something rather impressive about that. These organs, hidden quietly at the back of the abdomen, are making decisions that influence the volume of blood in the body and the pressure under which it moves. A person may spend the whole day thinking the heart is in charge of all things circulatory, and the heart certainly has a strong claim to importance. But the kidneys are behind the scenes shaping the very conditions under which the heart must work. It is one more reminder that organs cooperate in ways that make individual credit almost impossible to assign fairly. The kidneys are also essential in acid-base balance, which sounds a bit dry until one realizes how crucial it is. The body's pH must remain within a narrow range for proteins to function properly, enzymes to work efficiently, and cells to survive. Everyday metabolism produces acids, and the lungs help remove one major acid component by exhaling carbon dioxide. But the kidneys provide a slower, more precise chemical correction. They reabsorb bicarbonate, a key buffer, and they excrete hydrogen ions into the urine. They can also generate new bicarbonate when needed. This makes them essential partners to the lungs. Breathing helps regulate the gaseous side of acid-base balance. The kidneys handle much of the non-volatile acid burden and the longer-term compensation. Together, they keep the body's chemistry from drifting into conditions that would quickly become dangerous. Waste handling remains one of the kidney's most visible jobs, of course, and with good reason. Cells throughout the body constantly produce byproducts that must be removed. One of the best known is urea, formed in the liver from ammonia generated during protein metabolism. Urea travels through the blood to the kidneys, where it is filtered and eventually excreted, though some of it also plays a role in the kidney's concentration mechanisms. Creatinine, a breakdown product related to muscle metabolism, is another waste commonly measured to assess kidney function. The kidneys also help eliminate many drugs and their metabolites. So while they are doing all their subtle balancing work, they are also acting as a major route by which the blood is cleared of substances the body no longer wishes to keep. And yet the urine that finally leaves the kidneys is not simply raw wastewater drained thoughtlessly from the blood. It is the end result of innumerable selective processes. What remains in urine tells a story about what the body had in excess, what it needed to eliminate, and what it could afford to lose. A healthy kidney does not spill glucose into urine under ordinary conditions because glucose is valuable and is normally reabsorbed. Protein is also generally retained in the bloodstream because important plasma proteins should not leak across the filters in large amounts. Blood cells do not belong in urine either. When these things appear, they can signal trouble, revealing that the filters or reabsorption systems are not working as they should. The physical pathway of urine after it leaves the nephron is simple enough, but still worth admiring. Urine drains into collecting ducts, then into larger channels, and eventually into the renal pelvis, a funnel-like area at the centre of the kidney. From there it passes down the ureter, a muscular tube carrying urine to the bladder. The bladder stores it until conditions become socially and logistically favourable for release, which is perhaps a delicate way of saying that civilization depends in part on muscular timing and self-control. But by the time urine reaches the bladder, the kidneys have already done the difficult work. Storage is practical, filtration and balance are the true artistry. The kidneys also function as endocrine organs, which is a detail people often forget. They produce erythropoietin, a hormone that stimulates the bone marrow to make red blood cells. This makes perfect sense when you think about it. The kidneys are well placed to notice oxygen delivery problems because they are richly perfused and metabolically active. If oxygen availability is persistently low, increasing red blood cell production can help improve the blood's carrying capacity. When kidneys fail, erythropoietin production may fall, leading to anemia. This is one more way the kidneys reveal that they are more than filters. They are chemical participants in the management of the whole body. They also help activate vitamin D into a form the body can use more effectively, contributing to calcium and phosphate balance, and therefore to bone health. Again, this may seem like an unexpected responsibility for organs usually introduced in the context of urine, but that is the beauty of physiology. Real organs do not like staying in the simple categories we first assign them. The kidneys filter, yes, but they also help regulate blood composition, blood pressure, red blood cell production, mineral balance, and acid-base status. They are meticulous multitaskers. Their location makes practical sense too. The kidneys sit behind the abdominal cavity, in a position called retroperitoneal, protected to some extent by the lower ribs and tucked near major blood vessels. Their shape, often compared to beans, has become iconic, though one suspects the kidneys would prefer to be known for their function rather than their resemblance to lunch. Atop each kidney sits an adrenal gland, which is technically a separate organ but a close neighbour. The adrenal glands produce hormones involved in stress responses, salt balance and metabolism. Their proximity is a good anatomical reminder that the kidney region is a chemically active district, not merely a plumbing station. Like many quiet organs, the kidneys are easy to ignore until they begin to fail, and then the consequences can be profound. If kidney function declines, wastes accumulate in the blood, Fluid balance becomes unstable, electrolytes may drift to dangerous levels, blood pressure may rise, acid-base balance may falter, and hormone-related functions may weaken. Swelling can develop, fatigue can worsen, appetite can change, confusion may follow severe chemical imbalance. Because the kidneys serve so many systems at once, their failure is rarely neat or isolated. It becomes a story written across the whole body. This is another reason the kidneys deserve respect. Their normal function is so complete that many people never realize how much invisible stability they were providing. Kidney stones reveal a different aspect of their vulnerability. These can form when minerals and salts crystallize in concentrated urine, producing hard deposits that may remain in the kidney or travel into the ureter. Their reputation for causing severe pain is thoroughly earned. Here again, one sees that the kidneys are working at the edge of chemical precision. Urine must carry away dissolved substances, but if the conditions are right, those substances can precipitate out instead. The line between elegant excretion and excruciating geology turns out to be finer than one might wish. In healthy life, though, the kidneys go on hour after hour refining the blood. They are subtle organs, less interested in bold gestures than in exactness. They notice the concentration of salts, the volume of water, the pressure of the incoming blood, the acidity of the body fluids, the presence of certain hormones, the demands of the moment. Then they alter what leaves and what stays. They conserve when conserving is wise. They let go when release is safer. They maintain balance not by freezing the body into sameness, but by adapting continuously to change. This makes them deeply philosophical in their own unromantic way. The kidneys remind us that life is not preserved by holding everything. It is preserved by selecting wisely. Some things must stay, some must go. Too much water is a problem. Too little is a problem. Too much potassium threatens the rhythm of the heart. Too little sodium disrupts the chemistry of nerve and muscle. Too much acid unsettles cells. Too much volume burdens the circulation. The kidneys navigate all of this with quiet persistence. They are organs of discernment, and they work closely with almost everyone else. The liver sends them urea and many processed compounds for disposal. The heart depends on them for volume regulation and pressure balance. The lungs partner with them in acid-base control. The brain relies on them to keep the blood chemistry fit for neural function. Muscles depend on stable electrolytes to contract properly. Even bones are linked to kidney activity through vitamin D and mineral handling. The kidneys sit in the background, but nearly every system benefits from their accuracy. There is something calming in imagining them there now, hidden and busy, filtering blood through millions of microscopic units, turning an ever-changing stream into order. They are not dramatic organs. They do not pound or inflate or produce vivid sensations when all is well. They simply refine. They take in a river of blood and return it cleaner, better balanced, more fit for the next round of life. Quiet organs often deserve the most gratitude, and with the blood thus filtered and balanced, with wastes set on their way out, and the internal chemistry steadied for another stretch of living, the story can move from regulation to reception. Because after the kidneys help manage what the body keeps and what it discards, there is another organ waiting farther forward in the abdomen, ready for the moment when food first arrives in earnest. Not to filter blood, but to greet a meal directly, to churn, acidify, and begin the long work of turning what was eaten into something the rest of the body can eventually use. If the kidneys are quiet judges deciding what the body should keep and what it should let go, the stomach is something rather different. It is the first great receiving chamber of digestion, the place where a meal arrives not as a neat stream of nutrients, but as a mixed and often chaotic collection of textures, temperatures, flavours, and chemical possibilities. It sits in the upper abdomen, tucked beneath the diaphragm and slightly to the left, ready to welcome whatever has been swallowed, whether that happens to be a carefully balanced dinner, a hurried sandwich eaten while distracted, or an extremely optimistic late-night snack that seemed like a good idea at the time. The stomach is not the whole story of digestion, not even close, but it is an important beginning. It stores, churns, acidifies, sterilizes, and begins the controlled breakdown of food, turning a meal into something the intestines can handle more effectively. People often imagine digestion as a single smooth process, as though food enters one end of the body and is gradually dissolved by vague internal effort. In truth, digestion is a sequence of highly specialized tasks performed by different organs at different stages. The mouth begins the work with chewing and saliva, the esophagus transports, the stomach receives and transforms, the small intestine performs most of the real absorption. The liver, pancreas, and gallbladder contribute crucial chemical support. The large intestine recovers water and manages what remains. Each part has its moment, and the stomach's moment is one of preparation and control. It is not merely a sack where lunch goes to wait. It is an active muscular chamber that decides, in effect, how fast food should move onward and in what condition it should arrive. That role becomes easier to appreciate when one looks at the structure of the stomach itself. It is a hollow, muscular organ with specialized regions. Food enters from the esophagus at the upper end through an area near the cardia. The main central region, called the body, is where much of the mixing and chemical processing happens. The upper curved portion, the fundus, can help store swallowed food and gas. Lower down lies the antrum, which plays a major role in grinding and regulating emptying. At the far end is the pylorus, a narrowed outlet leading into the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum. The pyloric sphincter acts like a gatekeeper, controlling how much stomach contents are allowed through at a time. This is one of the stomach's great talents. It does not simply receive food and dump it onward, it meters the release carefully. The muscular wall of the stomach is built for this task. Unlike some other regions of the digestive tract, the stomach has multiple layers of muscle arranged in different directions, allowing it to churn and knead its contents with surprising strength. This mechanical action is just as important as the chemicals it secretes. Food is broken apart physically, mixed thoroughly with gastric juices, and reduced into a semi-liquid mixture called chyme. By the time chyme leaves the stomach, it has become far more manageable for the small intestine, so when people say the stomach digests food, they are partly right, but it is useful to be specific. The stomach begins digestion of certain components and prepares the meal physically and chemically for the more advanced stages that follow. Acid is one of the stomach's most famous features, and deservedly so. Specialized cells in the stomach lining called parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid, creating a highly acidic environment. The pH in the stomach can become very low, low enough to denature proteins and help unfold their structure, so digestive enzymes can attack them more effectively. This acid also serves another important purpose. It helps kill many microbes that enter with food, reducing the burden of pathogens moving deeper into the digestive tract. The stomach is therefore not only a digestive chamber, but also a defensive one. It is one of the places where the body meets the outside world with a degree of suspicion, which, given human culinary habits, is not entirely unreasonable. And yet, this creates an obvious problem. If the stomach contains strong acid, why does it not simply digest itself into a catastrophic puddle of poor planning? The answer lies in the protective design of its lining. The stomach wall is coated with a layer of mucus rich in bicarbonate, which helps buffer the acid near the tissue surface. Epithelial cells are tightly joined and rapidly renewed. Blood flow helps support repair and protection. In a healthy stomach, there is a careful balance between aggressive factors, such as acid and digestive enzymes, and defensive factors, such as mucus, bicarbonate, good circulation, and tissue renewal. When that balance is disturbed, problems can emerge, including inflammation or ulcers. The stomach is robust, but it lives on the edge of its own chemistry and must maintain its defenses continuously. The enzyme most closely associated with the stomach is pepsin, which begins the digestion of proteins. Pepsin is secreted in an inactive form called pepsinogen by chief cells in the stomach lining. Once exposed to the acidic environment, pepsinogen is activated into pepsin, which starts cutting long protein chains into smaller fragments. This is an elegant safety measure. If the enzyme were fully active inside the cells that make it, that would be a rather unfortunate staffing policy. By secreting it in an inactive form and activating it only in the stomach lumen, the body reduces the risk of self-damage. Biology is often clever in exactly this practical way. Protein digestion then begins here, but it is not completed here. The stomach gets the process started. It softens, unfolds, and partially breaks down protein structures. Later, pancreatic enzymes and intestinal enzymes will carry the process much farther, reducing proteins to peptides and amino acids that can be absorbed. This is a good example of how the digestive tract works as a sequence. No single organ does everything, each prepares the way for the next. The stomach also contributes in more subtle ways. Parietal cells produce intrinsic factor, a protein essential for the later absorption of vitamin B12 in the small intestine. This is one of those wonderfully indirect relationships that physiology loves. A substance produced in one organ becomes crucial for absorption much later and farther down the digestive tract. Without intrinsic factor, vitamin B12 cannot be absorbed properly, and deficiency can develop over time, affecting blood formation and nervous system function. So even the stomach's quieter secretions can have far-reaching consequences. Storage is another major function. When you eat a meal, it does not all need to reach the small intestine at once. In fact, that would be rather unhelpful. The small intestine has immense surface area and tremendous absorptive capacity, but it still works best when material arrives at a controlled pace. The stomach acts as a reservoir, holding food temporarily and releasing it gradually. This is especially important because different meals require different handling. A glass of water moves through much more quickly than a fatty, protein-rich meal. Liquids often empty faster than solids. Carbohydrate-heavy meals may leave more quickly than meals rich in fat, which tend to slow gastric emptying. The stomach does not rush for the sake of efficiency. It adjusts its timing so the rest of the digestive system is not overwhelmed. That timing depends on constant communication between the stomach, the brain, and the intestines. Before food even arrives, the stomach can begin preparing. The sight, smell, thought, or taste of food can stimulate gastric secretion through signals involving the brain and the vagus nerve. This is sometimes called the cephalic phase of digestion. In other words, digestion begins not when food lands in the stomach, but when the body anticipates eating. Then comes the gastric phase, when food actually stretches the stomach and stimulates local reflexes and hormone release, increasing acid secretion and muscular activity. Later, as chyme begins entering the small intestine, the intestinal phase brings new feedback. If the intestine senses too much acid, too much fat, or too rapid an arrival of material, hormones and neural signals can slow gastric emptying. The stomach listens downstream as well as upstream. This communication is one reason the digestive tract feels so alive and coordinated rather than mechanical. Hunger, fullness, nausea, anticipation, satisfaction, and discomfort all arise from complex conversations among organs, hormones, nerves, and the brain. The stomach is central in many of these sensations. When it stretches during a meal, signals travel toward the brain indicating increasing fullness. Hormones are released that shape appetite and digestion. The stomach also produces ghrelin, a hormone associated with hunger. Ghrelin levels often rise before meals and fall afterward, helping influence when food seems appealing. The stomach, then, is not just a passive recipient of appetite, it participates in the regulation of appetite itself. That participation helps explain why hunger can feel so physical. It is not merely a thought about food, it often includes rhythmic stomach contractions, hormonal changes, altered attention, and a growing awareness of emptiness or restlessness. Of course, the brain interprets and amplifies these signals, and emotional or habitual eating can complicate the picture. But the stomach contributes to the body's timing of meals in very real ways. It is part of the lived experience of wanting food, not just the chemistry that follows after you eat it. The stomach's movements are more sophisticated than simple squeezing. After a meal, the upper portion of the stomach relaxes to accommodate incoming food without producing an immediate and dramatic rise in pressure. This is called receptive relaxation, and it allows the stomach to store a meal more comfortably. Then, as digestion proceeds, waves of muscular contraction help mix the food with gastric secretions and grind solid particles down. The antrum plays a particularly strong role in this mixing and grinding, pushing contents toward the pylorus. Larger particles may be driven against the partially closed pyloric outlet and pushed back into the stomach body, a process called retropulsion, which helps break them down further. Only sufficiently processed material is allowed onward in significant amounts. The stomach, in other words, behaves a bit like a patient mill as well as a chamber of chemistry. This grinding matters because the small intestine functions better when food arrives in a consistent semi-fluid form. The stomach is taking the disorder of a meal and imposing preparation upon it. A bite of meat, a piece of bread, a spoonful of yogurt, a few vegetables, all different in texture and composition, are gradually transformed into chyme. The result is not elegant to imagine at the dinner table, perhaps, but biologically it is highly effective. Digestion often becomes easier to appreciate when one stops expecting it to remain visually dignified. The stomach also plays a role in managing osmotic and chemical challenges. Very concentrated substances, highly acidic material, and meals rich in fat can influence the rate of gastric emptying. This protects the small intestine by preventing sudden overwhelming loads that would disrupt fluid balance or digestion. The duodenum, the first section of the small intestine, is especially active in this feedback. It samples what is arriving and sends signals back if the stomach needs to slow down. Hormones such as secretin and cholecystokinin are involved in this dialogue. These signals do not exist to annoy hungry people waiting for dessert. They exist because coordination matters more than speed. For all its strengths, the stomach can be sensitive. Anyone who has felt nausea, indigestion, reflux, or a crampy emptiness knows that the stomach is not shy when something is amiss. Nausea is especially interesting because it often reflects broader protective signaling rather than damage within the stomach alone. The brainstem, inner ear, blood chemistry, emotions, and digestive tract can all contribute. The stomach may slow its emptying, reverse its movements, or become part of a coordinated response to perceived threat. Vomiting, unpleasant as it is a protective reflex. The body decides that what has entered, or what is happening internally, is dangerous enough to justify forceful rejection. Again, the stomach does not work in isolation. It is woven into broader systems of defense. Acid reflux reveals another aspect of stomach function and anatomy. At the junction between the esophagus and stomach lies a functional barrier, often supported by the lower esophageal sphincter, that normally helps prevent acidic stomach contents from moving upward. If this barrier relaxes inappropriately or becomes less effective, acid can splash back into the esophagus, producing the burning discomfort known as heartburn. The esophagus is built for transport, not for bathing in acid, so even modest backflow can feel significant. This is one more case where anatomy and chemical environment must be carefully matched. Acid is useful in the stomach because the stomach is prepared for it. Elsewhere, it becomes a problem. Ulcers provide a more dramatic example of what happens when the balance between protection and aggression breaks down. If the mucus layer is weakened, blood flow impaired, or acid and pepsin allow too much direct access to tissue, the lining can become eroded. Infection with Helicobacter pylori, a bacterium adapted to survive in the stomach's challenging environment, is a common cause of such problems. Certain medications, especially non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, can also reduce protective mechanisms. The result may be pain, bleeding, or chronic irritation. The stomach is powerful, but as ever in biology, power demands regulation. And still, in ordinary health, the stomach performs beautifully. You eat, and it receives. It relaxes to accommodate the meal. It secretes acid, enzymes, and mucus. It churns and grinds. It begins protein digestion. It meters the release of chyme into the intestine. It contributes to hunger signaling and fullness. It produces intrinsic factor. It protects the body from some pathogens entering with food. All of this occurs without the need for conscious supervision. You can be talking, walking, reading, or drifting towards sleep, and the stomach will continue its work beneath your awareness. There is something comforting in that image. The stomach is not trying to finish digestion alone. It is doing its part with discipline and then passing the meal onward in improved form. It is a gate, but not a bottleneck. It is a chamber of transformation, but not the final destination. It stands between swallowing and absorption, between appetite and assimilation, between the outer act of eating and the inner act of nourishment. Food does not truly become part of you here, not yet. But here it is, first prepared for that long, intimate journey. It is also a reminder that nourishment is slower than consumption. Eating may take 10 minutes. Digestion takes much longer. Absorption, storage, metabolism, and use continue long after the plate is empty. The stomach sits at the threshold of that truth. It knows that a meal is not just an event, it is a process that must be paced. This is perhaps one reason the stomach so often becomes the site where people feel the consequences of hurry, stress, or excess. It is a disciplined organ placed at the meeting point between desire and handling, and once the stomach has done its work, once food has become chyme, and the pylorus has allowed it onward in measured portions, the next stage belongs to a much longer and even more remarkable pathway, because real absorption, the harvesting of sugars, amino acids, fats, vitamins, water and minerals, is only just beginning. What leaves the stomach enters a vast internal route where digestion continues and where the meal is finally sorted into nourishment and residue, into what the body will keep and what it will leave behind. Once the stomach has done its patient work, once the meal has been softened, acidified, and reduced to a flowing mixture fit for the next stage, the food passes into a part of the body that is far longer, more intricate, and more quietly impressive than most people ever imagine. The intestines are not merely tubes through which lunch takes a final weary journey toward the exit. They are among the most important landscapes in the body, where digestion is completed, nutrients are absorbed, water is reclaimed, microbes participate in the great domestic business of being alive, and the body decides what will become part of itself and what will be let go. If the stomach is the gate where digestion begins in earnest, the intestines are the long inner path where nourishment is truly harvested, and where the remains of a meal are gradually transformed from useful material into waste. It is tempting to picture the intestines as one continuous hose, perhaps looping about in a manner that would make a plumber sigh heavily and reach for a stronger cup of tea. But in truth, they are specialized regions with distinct jobs, different structures, and very different priorities. The small intestine handles most digestion and most absorption. The large intestine, despite the name, is not longer but wider, and its work is less about harvesting calories and more about reclaiming water, managing electrolytes, working with the resident microbial community, and preparing waste for removal. Together they form a system that is not glamorous perhaps, but absolutely essential. A body can survive without a dramatic sense of mystery. It cannot survive long without absorbing nutrients and managing its waste properly. The small intestine begins immediately after the stomach, starting with the duodenum, the short first segment that receives the acidic chyme arriving through the pylorus. This is where the digestive story becomes a true collaboration. The stomach has prepared the meal, but the duodenum welcomes two very important partners into the process. From the pancreas come digestive enzymes and bicarbonate-rich fluid. From the liver, via the bile ducts, and often through the gallbladder's careful timing, comes bile. These secretions are crucial. The pancreas sends enzymes that break down carbohydrates, proteins, and fats much more completely than the stomach can manage alone. The bicarbonate helps neutralize the stomach acid, because while the stomach thrives in harsh acidity, the small intestine prefers a less corrosive setting. Bile, meanwhile, helps emulsify fats, breaking large fat droplets into smaller ones so enzymes can work on them efficiently. The duodenum, then, is not just the first part of the intestine. It is a kind of chemical crossroads where several organs bring their contributions together. Beyond the duodenum lie the jejunum and ileum, the longer stretches of the small intestine where most absorption takes place. Altogether, the small intestine is astonishingly long, several meters in an adult, coiled compactly into the abdomen with an efficiency that would be deeply enviable in suitcase packing. Its lining is not smooth. That would be far too wasteful. Instead, it is thrown into folds, covered in finger-like projections called villi, and each villus is itself lined with cells whose surfaces are covered in microscopic projections called microvilli. This creates a vast surface area for absorption, much larger than the intestine's outward appearance would suggest. Biology loves folding extra function into limited space, and the small intestine is one of its finest examples. That surface area matters because absorption is the central task here. Food is only useful once its components cross into the body and form cells can eventually use. Carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars such as glucose. Proteins are reduced to amino acids and small peptides. Fats are digested into fatty acids and monoglycerides, then handled in more complicated ways because fat, as ever, resists easy cooperation in watery environments. Vitamins, minerals, and water also move across the intestinal lining. The small intestine is not simply a place where food passes, it is where food becomes you, or at least becomes available to be transformed into you later, which is a rather intimate and slightly unsettling thought, if one lingers on it too much before sleep. The cells lining the small intestine are highly specialized for this work. They are absorptive, but they are not passive. Transport proteins, enzymes, gradients, and membrane structures all help determine what enters, how quickly, and by what route. Some molecules diffuse across more easily. Others require energy-dependent transport. Glucose and certain amino acids, for instance, are often taken up using transporters linked to sodium gradients. Water moves according to osmotic conditions, following the movement of solutes. Fats are a little more complicated. After digestion, their components combine with bile salts to form tiny structures called machelles, which help ferry them to the absorptive surface. Once inside intestinal cells, the fats are reassembled and packaged into chylomicrons, which are too large to enter ordinary blood capillaries directly, and instead pass into lymphatic vessels called lacteals within the villi. From there they eventually enter the bloodstream. It is a wonderfully indirect system, and a reminder that the body rarely solves a difficult problem in only one step. The small intestine also continues digestion at its own surface. Enzymes attached to the brush border of the intestinal lining help finish the breakdown of sugars and peptides into absorbable units. So while pancreatic enzymes do much of the heavy chemical work in the lumen, the intestine itself provides the final polish. This border between the outside world and the inside world is not a passive wall. It is a living, active interface, deciding, processing, and protecting all at once. Protection is very important here because the intestine, like the lungs, is a place where the body is open to the outside world in a deeply practical sense. Food, microbes, and countless substances pass through the intestinal lumen, and the body must absorb what is useful without letting dangerous things pass too freely. The intestinal lining therefore functions as both an absorptive surface and a barrier. Tight junctions between cells help regulate passage. Immune tissue associated with the gut monitors what is present. Mucus provides some protection. The intestine must remain selectively permeable, open enough to nourish, guarded enough to defend. This balance is one of the great themes of digestive biology. Too rigid a barrier and absorption would fail. Too loose a barrier and the immune system would be in constant chaos. The small intestine also has its own pattern of movement. Food does not simply tumble through as if down a chute. Rhythmic contractions mix contents with digestive juices and bring them repeatedly into contact with the absorptive surface. Other waves of contraction move material onward gradually. This motility changes depending on whether a person is actively digesting a meal or fasting between meals. During fasting, the intestine participates in a kind of housekeeping pattern called the migrating motor complex, sweeping residual material along. During digestion, movement becomes more focused on mixing and controlled advancement. The goal, once again, is not speed for its own sake. It is effective processing. And then there is the matter of timing. The small intestine does not merely receive whatever the stomach sends and hope for the best. Signals between these organs help coordinate delivery. If the small intestine is presented with too much acid, too much fat, or too large a load too quickly, it sends hormonal and neural signals that slow gastric emptying. This protects digestion and absorption from becoming overwhelmed. The body is full of these feedback loops, quiet little negotiations between organs about what can be handled at any given moment. The intestine is very much part of that conversation. The immune role of the intestine deserves a little more admiration than it usually gets. A large portion of the body's immune tissue is associated with the gut, which makes sense when one considers how much foreign material passes through there. The gut must tolerate food proteins and vast communities of resident microbes, while remaining alert to genuine threats. This requires an immune system capable of nuance, which, like many humans in heated discussions, it does not always manage perfectly. But in health, the balance is extraordinary. The intestine learns tolerance where tolerance is wise and mounts defense where defense is necessary. A great many daily immunological decisions happen here without your awareness, and your continued comfort owes much to their success. The resident microbes themselves are part of the story too, especially as we move toward the large intestine. Even the small intestine contains some microbial life, though generally less densely than the colon. By the time material reaches the large intestine, however, the microbial population becomes one of the most striking features of the environment. Trillions of bacteria and other microorganisms live there, feeding on what we do not digest ourselves, producing metabolites, influencing the local immune environment, and contributing to aspects of health that researchers are still working hard to untangle. It would be romantic nonsense to say your microbes are little wise companions offering life advice, but it is perfectly fair to say they are deeply involved in the biology of digestion and beyond. Before we reach them fully, though, it is worth pausing at the end of the small intestine to appreciate just how much it has already accomplished. By this point, most digestible carbohydrate, protein and fat has been broken down and absorbed. Many vitamins and minerals have been taken up. Water has already begun moving significantly. What remains is not worthless, but it is less about nourishment and more about recovery, fermentation, shaping and elimination. This is where the large intestine begins its quieter but no less necessary labour. The large intestine starts at the cecum, a pouch-like region receiving material from the small intestine through the ileocecal valve. Attached here is the appendix, a small tube with a rather complicated reputation. Once dismissed as functionless, it is now thought to have immune roles and perhaps to serve as a kind of microbial refuge, though one suspects it still resents being known mainly for inflammation and surgical urgency. From the cecum, material moves upward through the ascending colon, across the abdomen through the transverse colon, down the left side through the descending colon, and onward into the sigmoid colon and rectum. It is a slower landscape than the small intestine, broader in diameter, more focused on conservation and compaction than on high-speed nutrient capture. The large intestine absorbs water and electrolytes from the remaining intestinal contents. This is a crucial function because a great deal of fluid enters the digestive tract each day, not only from food and drink but also from digestive secretions. If all that water were simply lost in the stool, life would become very short and extremely inconvenient. Instead, the colon reclaims a significant amount, gradually converting the liquid contents arriving from the small intestine into the more formed fecal material that will eventually be expelled. Sodium and other electrolytes are handled here as well, contributing to the final composition of what stays and what goes. In that sense, the large intestine is a conservation organ. It recovers what can still be usefully saved. The microbes of the colon participate actively in this process. They ferment indigestible carbohydrates, including certain fibers the human digestive enzymes cannot break down on their own. This fermentation produces gases, which explain certain social realities best handled with grace and an open window, but it also produces short-chain fatty acids such as acetate, propionate, and butyrate. These molecules can be absorbed and used by the body, and they help nourish the cells lining the colon. So even substances we do not directly digest can become biologically useful through microbial cooperation. It is one of the lovelier examples of how the body is less a solitary machine than a managed ecosystem. These microbes also contribute to vitamin production, including vitamin K and certain B vitamins, though the precise nutritional impact varies. More broadly, they influence immune development, gut barrier function, and possibly even aspects of metabolism and signalling that extend beyond the gut itself. The colon is not just a waste pipe, it is a biologically active environment in conversation with the rest of the body. That said, it remains wise not to anthropomorphize it too enthusiastically. Your colon is not running a tiny philosophical salon. It is doing chemistry, fermentation, water reclamation, and coordinated propulsion, which is impressive enough. Movement in the large intestine is slower and more deliberate than in the small intestine. Contents may remain there for many hours, even longer, allowing time for water absorption and microbial activity. Segmentation helps mix material locally, while periodic stronger movements called mass movements help propel contents farther along the colon toward the rectum. These stronger waves often occur after meals, part of a reflexive response that links activity in one part of the digestive system to movement in another. The digestive tract, as ever, does not believe in minding only its own business. The rectum and anal canal complete the final stage. As fecal material enters the rectum, stretch receptors signal that it is filling. Reflexes help relax internal muscular structures, while external control remains under voluntary command, at least in healthy adults with access to proper facilities and a functioning sense of timing. There is something almost comically dignified about how much muscular coordination and neural control go into what is usually discussed with embarrassment or avoided altogether. Yet elimination is not an afterthought. It is part of health. Waste that cannot be used must leave, and the body has built an orderly system for doing just that. The stool itself is composed of water, undigested food residues, bacteria, sloughed intestinal cells, bile pigments altered by intestinal processes, and various waste products. Its appearance can change with diet, hydration, transit time, bleeding, disease, and a whole assortment of factors that physicians care about far more openly than dinner guests usually do. This too is revealing. The intestine is not only about invisible chemistry, it leaves evidence. What the body excretes often reflects what happened upstream. When intestinal function is disturbed, the results can be deeply uncomfortable because this system depends so much on balance. If movement becomes too fast, as in diarrhea, water is not absorbed sufficiently, and losses can become dangerous. If movement becomes too slow, constipation can result, with excessive water absorption making stool harder and more difficult to pass. Inflammation can impair absorption, damage the lining, or disturb motility. infections can disrupt the microbial balance and trigger immune responses. Malabsorption syndromes can leave a person undernourished despite eating adequately. Irritable bowel patterns can alter sensation and movement in ways that are very real and often exhausting. The intestines, though patient, are not indifferent. When their balance is lost, they tend to say so clearly, and still, in health, they carry on with remarkable devotion. The small intestine receives the partially processed meal and carefully dismantles it into absorbable pieces. Its enormous surface gathers sugars, amino acids, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water into the body's internal world. The large intestine then takes what remains, reclaims fluid, hosts microbial activity, shapes waste, and prepares it for removal. Together they complete a transformation that began with appetite and chewing and ends with nourishment distributed, water conserved, and leftovers carried away. It is not glamorous work, but it is foundational. A body fed is not the same as a body nourished. The intestines are where that difference is decided. There is something almost tender in how much of life depends on these long internal pathways. Every memory you form, every step you take, every heartbeat, every breath, every quiet thought before sleep depends in part on whether the body has been able to absorb what it needs and eliminate what it cannot use. The intestines sit at that crossroads between outer intake and inner continuity. They are the long place where the world becomes body, and where the body lets the unusable remnants go. And of course, even here the work is not done alone, because while the intestines receive bile from the liver and digestive support from the pancreas itself has been waiting in the background all this time, contributing enzymes to the gut while also performing another job just as important, one that reaches far beyond digestion and into the everyday regulation of sugar, energy, and metabolic balance throughout the body. If the intestines are the long inner path where food is finally broken down, absorbed and sorted, then the pancreas is one of the quiet specialists that made much of that work possible all along. It is not an organ people talk about often unless a doctor brings it up, a blood test goes sideways, or someone is trying very hard to explain sugar metabolism at a dinner table that was, until then, having a perfectly pleasant evening. Yet the pancreas is one of the most important balancing organs in the body. It sits tucked deep in the upper abdomen, behind the stomach and close to the first part of the small intestine, modest in size, pale in appearance, and astonishingly busy. It contributes digestive enzymes to the gut, releases hormones into the blood, helps regulate sugar levels, and quietly supports the body's effort to keep energy available without allowing that same energy to become destructive. It is one of those organs whose success is measured by how little you notice it. When it works well, meals are processed smoothly, and blood glucose stays within workable limits. When it struggles, the whole body feels the consequences. That dual role is part of what makes the pancreas so fascinating. Many organs have one dominant public identity. The heart pumps, the lungs exchange gases, the kidneys filter. The pancreas does something more complicated. Part of it belongs to digestion, another part belongs to hormone regulation. One portion sends chemical secretions into the intestine through ducts, another sends hormones directly into the bloodstream. In the language of physiology, this means the pancreas is both an exocrine and an endocrine organ. Those words can sound a little formal for bedtime company, but the idea is simple enough. Exocrine secretions go through ducts to somewhere specific, in this case the small intestine. Endocrine secretions enter the blood and travel through the body. The pancreas is doing both at once, which already makes it rather impressive. Its location makes practical sense once you know what it does. The pancreas lies close to the duodenum, the first section of the small intestine that receives chyme from the stomach. This is where digestive support is urgently needed, because acidic material from the stomach is arriving and must be neutralized, and because proteins, fats, and carbohydrates now need a more thorough chemical breakdown than the stomach could provide on its own. The pancreas is perfectly positioned to help. It sends pancreatic juice through ducts into the duodenum, delivering enzymes and bicarbonate-rich fluid right where they are needed. The digestive tract is full of this kind of spatial intelligence. Organs sit where their contributions will be most useful, and the pancreas is a fine example of anatomy serving timing. The exocrine portion of the pancreas makes up most of the organ. It consists of clusters of cells called acini that produce digestive enzymes, along with duct cells that secrete bicarbonate and water. These secretions combine and travel through the pancreatic duct into the small intestine, often joining the bile duct along the way. When a meal enters the duodenum, hormones released by the intestine and signals from the nervous system stimulate the pancreas to respond. This is another lovely reminder that digestion is not one organ working alone while the others politely wait their turn. The stomach empties. The intestine senses what is arriving. The pancreas answers. The liver and gallbladder contribute. The system is conversational. The enzymes the pancreas sends are essential for dismantling food into absorbable pieces. Pancreatic amylase helps break down carbohydrates. Lipase helps digest fats. Proteases such as trypsin and chymotrypsin help digest proteins. There are others as well, each contributing to the chemical effort of turning a meal into molecules small enough to cross the intestinal lining. Without these enzymes, food would pass through the digestive tract far less usefully. A person might eat plenty and yet absorb poorly, losing calories and nutrients because the body could not finish the work of digestion. It is one of the quiet truths of physiology that having food is not the same as being able to use it. The pancreas helps close that gap. The bicarbonate in pancreatic juice is just as important as the enzymes. The stomach sends acidic chyme into the duodenum, and while that acidity was useful in the stomach, the small intestine needs a more neutral environment for pancreatic enzymes to work properly and for the delicate intestinal lining to avoid being irritated by harsh acid. Bicarbonate helps neutralize the incoming acid, raising the pH and creating conditions better suited to digestion and absorption. This is one of those practical acts of internal diplomacy the body performs constantly. One organ's useful chemistry becomes another organ's problem unless someone adjusts the setting. The pancreas arrives with exactly the right kind of chemical reassurance. There is also a clever safety feature in how pancreatic proteases are handled. Enzymes that digest proteins would be dangerous if they were fully active while still inside the pancreas itself. An organ digesting its own tissues would be a poor long-term strategy. So many of these enzymes are produced in inactive forms called zymogens and only activated after they enter the small intestine. This protects the pancreas from its own potency, at least under healthy conditions. Biology is often at its most admirable when it anticipates the problems its own power could create. Still, when those protections fail, pancreatic inflammation can be severe, which tells you just how strong these digestive substances really are. If the digestive role of the pancreas were all it did, it would already deserve much more admiration than it usually receives. But the endocrine role is what makes it one of the body's most delicate regulators of balance. Scattered through the pancreatic tissue are clusters of endocrine cells called the islets of Langerhans. These are small islands in a sea of exocrine tissue, yet their influence stretches through the entire body. Different cell types within the islets produce different hormones, the most famous being insulin from beta cells and glucagon from alpha cells. There are others too, such as somatostatin, but insulin and glucagon are the great paired regulators most people eventually hear about, and with good reason. Together they help manage blood glucose, keeping it from swinging too far in either direction. Glucose is one of the body's most important fuels. Many tissues can use a range of energy sources under different conditions, but the brain in particular depends heavily on a steady supply of glucose in everyday life. Too little glucose in the blood and cells, especially brain cells, may struggle. Too much glucose, especially over long periods, can damage tissues, blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, eyes, and more. So the body must regulate glucose carefully. It cannot simply allow every meal to produce enormous spikes followed by dramatic collapses. The pancreas is one of the central organs making sure that does not happen. After a meal, as carbohydrates are digested and absorbed, blood glucose begins to rise. Beta cells in the pancreas sense this increase and release insulin. Insulin is often described as a hormone that lowers blood sugar, which is true, but it is helpful to think more specifically. Insulin tells tissues that fuel is available and helps coordinate what should happen next. It encourages cells, especially in muscle and fat tissue, to take up glucose more readily. It signals the liver to store glucose as glycogen. It supports energy storage and influences fat and protein metabolism as well. In effect, insulin helps move the body from a fasting state into a fed state, guiding nutrients into cells and promoting storage where appropriate. That storage is not wasteful, it is strategic. A meal may bring in more fuel than the body needs in the next 10 minutes, and some of it should be saved for later. The liver can store glycogen. Muscles can store glycogen for their own use. Fat tissue can store excess energy more durably. Insulin supports this broader pattern of abundance handling. It is not simply about removing sugar from the blood because sugar is somehow morally suspect. It is about matching fuel availability to the body's needs, protecting tissues from excessive circulating glucose, while also making sure energy is stored and accessible later. When blood glucose begins to fall, especially between meals or during fasting, another side of the balance becomes more important. Alpha cells in the pancreas release glucagon, which acts in many ways as insulin's counterbalance. Glucagon signals the liver to break down glycogen and release glucose into the bloodstream. It also supports the generation of new glucose from other sources. This helps maintain blood sugar when no food is arriving, so the pancreas is not only managing plenty, it is also helping the body navigate absence. After a meal, it helps store. Between meals, it helps supply. That rhythmic adaptation is one of the hallmarks of healthy metabolism. It is useful to pause here and appreciate how elegant that balance really is. The body does not wait until glucose becomes wildly high or dangerously low before caring. It makes constant small adjustments, guided by what the pancreas detects and what the tissues require. Every ordinary day is full of minor metabolic transitions. You eat breakfast, work for a few hours, have lunch, walk somewhere, sit still, drink coffee, perhaps eat something sweet, perhaps not. Through all of this, the pancreas is monitoring, releasing, restraining, and adjusting. It helps convert the chaos of modern eating patterns into a chemistry most cells can survive. This is one reason the pancreas feels so central to the story of energy and appetite. Even though it is not the only organ involved, the liver stores and releases fuel. Fat tissue stores energy and releases signaling molecules. Muscles use large amounts of glucose under certain conditions. The brain influences hunger and satiety. The intestines send hormonal messages after meals. But the pancreas is one of the great interpreters at the centre of this web. It notices the bloodstream changing and answers with hormonal guidance. It does not decide everything. It coordinates much. The body's sensitivity to insulin matters greatly here. When cells respond normally to insulin, glucose can be handled efficiently. When they become less responsive, a state often called insulin resistance, the pancreas must work harder, releasing more insulin to achieve the same effect. For a time it may compensate. Blood glucose may remain near normal while insulin levels climb, but over time, if the resistance persists and the pancreatic beta cells cannot keep up indefinitely, glucose regulation may worsen. This is part of the long story behind type 2 diabetes, a condition that reveals how demanding blood sugar regulation truly is. The problem is not just one bad meal or one lazy afternoon, it is the gradual strain placed on a finely tuned system. Type 1 diabetes tells a different story. In this condition, the immune system attacks the insulin-producing beta cells, leaving the body unable to produce sufficient insulin. Without insulin, glucose accumulates in the blood while many cells are unable to use it properly. The result can be dangerous very quickly. This reveals something profound about the pancreas. A small cluster of damaged cells in a relatively quiet organ can alter the metabolism of the entire body. Muscles, liver, fat tissue, kidneys, blood vessels, nerves, eyes, all begin to feel the effects. It is hard to think of a better example of how local failure can become global disruption in physiology. And yet, even beyond the famous glucose story, insulin does more than most casual explanations admit. It shapes fat storage and fat breakdown. It influences protein synthesis. It affects how cells interpret abundance. A body repeatedly exposed to high insulin after meals is not simply processing sugar. It is moving into a state that favours storage and fuel handling in particular ways. This is why the pancreas matters so much in discussions of energy balance, fasting, obesity, and metabolic health. Not because it is the sole villain or hero in any simplistic nutritional morality tale, but because it is one of the organs deciding what the body should do with incoming fuel. There is something almost managerial about that. The digestive enzymes from the exocrine pancreas help break the meal down in the intestine. The endocrine pancreas then helps decide how the absorbed nutrients will be used, stored, or released later. One part helps prepare the food. Another part helps direct the body's response to having eaten it. Few organs participate so directly in both the arrival of nutrients and the broader consequences of their absorption. The pancreas also illustrates a recurring truth about the body. Balance is usually maintained through opposition, not through one fixed setting. Insulin lowers blood glucose by supporting uptake and storage. Glucagon raises it by supporting release and production. Digestive enzymes break food down. Protective mechanisms prevent those enzymes from harming the pancreas itself. Bicarbonate neutralizes stomach acid, so intestinal digestion can proceed. Again and again, physiological success depends on matched forces, not on the domination of one process over all others. Its physical appearance offers little hint of this complexity. The pancreas is long and somewhat flattened, with a head nestled near the duodenum, a body extending across the abdomen, and a tail pointing toward the spleen. It is soft, glandular, and not nearly as theatrical in shape as some organs seem determined to be. Yet inside this modest structure, digestion and endocrine control are being orchestrated minute by minute. One suspects the pancreas would dislike excessive attention and would much prefer people simply respect its workload and avoid making its life harder than necessary. When the pancreas is inflamed, as in pancreatitis, it reminds everyone very firmly that it exists. Because pancreatic enzymes are powerful and the organ lies deep in the abdomen, inflammation can produce severe pain and serious illness. Gallstones blocking the pancreatic duct, heavy alcohol use, certain medications, high triglyceride levels, and other conditions can trigger it. The severity of pancreatitis reveals just how dangerous digestive chemistry becomes when it escapes its proper boundaries. The pancreas is safe largely because its enzymes are carefully produced, transported and activated in the right place. Disturb that order, and the consequences can be dramatic. Cancer of the pancreas is another sobering reminder of its importance and its hiddenness. Because the organ sits deep in the abdomen and does not always produce obvious early symptoms when diseased, problems can remain unnoticed until they are advanced. This quietness, which serves it so well in ordinary life, can become a disadvantage in illness. The pancreas works best when invisible, but invisibility is a double-edged privilege in biology. Still, in health, its ordinary work remains extraordinary. After a meal, it sends enzymes into the intestine. It helps neutralize stomach acid. It senses the rise in glucose and releases insulin. Between meals, it supports the opposite transition through glucagon. It participates in storing abundance and mobilizing reserves. It helps the body avoid both excess and shortage. All day, all night, whether you're eating, sleeping, exercising, or doing something unwise with pastries, the pancreas is reading the chemistry and responding. There is something deeply calming in the image of such an organ working without noise. It does not beat audibly. It does not expand and contract with every visible breath. It does not usually draw attention with sensation, yet it is there. behind the stomach, beside the duodenum, carrying out two very different but beautifully related jobs. It helps turn food into absorbable pieces, and it helps ensure that once those pieces enter the blood, they are handled in a way the body can survive. And of course, even the best managed bloodstream needs protection. Nutrients circulate, oxygen flows, wastes are carried away, hormones travel, but so do threats. Damaged cells must be cleared, old red blood cells must be removed, immune responses must be organised and restrained. Blood itself, the great moving river of the body, needs watchful guardians as well as pumps and filters, which means the next part of the journey belongs naturally to the quieter defenders tucked off to one side and spread through hidden tissues, where protection, surveillance and cleanup become their own kind of patient labour. Once nutrients have been absorbed, oxygen has been loaded, sugar has been regulated and blood is moving through the body with all its ordinary cargo, another question quietly rises in the background. How is all of this protected? A living body is never simply feeding and circulating. It is also watching, sorting, identifying, repairing, remembering and defending. Every day cells age and break apart, tiny injuries occur, microbes try their luck, strange proteins appear, harmless things must be tolerated while dangerous things must be recognised quickly enough to matter. The bloodstream, so useful for transport, is also a route by which trouble could spread if nothing stood guard. This is where the spleen and the wider family of immune organs come into their own. They do not often receive the same poetic attention as the heart or the brain, but they are among the most watchful structures in the body. They patrol, filter, educate, recycle, and respond. They are less like dramatic warriors charging across a battlefield, and more like patient defenders stationed at gates, crossroads, and quiet checkpoints, trying to keep order in a world that is always one meal, one cut, one sneeze, or one unlucky encounter away from a microbial misunderstanding. The spleen is perhaps the strangest of these organs in public imagination, because many people know it exists vaguely, but would struggle to explain what it actually does. It sits high in the upper left abdomen, tucked beneath the ribs and close to the stomach, soft and dark and richly supplied with blood. It is not essential for life in the same immediate way that the brain or heart are, but it is deeply useful, and when healthy it performs several important tasks so quietly that a person may go decades without giving it a single thought. It filters blood, it helps remove old or damaged red blood cells, it stores some blood components, it participates in immune surveillance, it supports responses to certain infections, especially those involving bacteria circulating in the blood. It is, in short, both a cleanup organ and an immune organ, which is a rather elegant combination. The body seems to like structures that can tidy the household while also keeping one eye on the door. The blood passing through the spleen is not merely flowing by for scenery. The spleen examines it. Within the spleen are regions organised for different purposes. The red pulp is heavily involved in filtering the blood and removing worn-out red blood cells, while the white pulp contains immune cells arranged around blood vessels, helping detect and respond to pathogens or unfamiliar antigens travelling in the circulation. This dual structure is one of the reasons the spleen feels so distinctive. The lymph nodes, which we will come to in a moment, filter lymph. The spleen filters blood. That makes it especially important because the bloodstream connects the entire body. Anything travelling there is not staying local for long. Red blood cells are remarkable little structures, flexible, efficient, and specialised for carrying oxygen, but they do not last forever. On average, they circulate for about 4 months before becoming less resilient. They may grow less flexible, their membranes may change, and eventually they need to be removed from circulation before they become more of a burden than a benefit. The spleen is one of the main places where this happens. As blood moves through the spleen's intricate architecture, older or less flexible red blood cells may struggle to pass through the narrow spaces and become trapped. Macrophages, the body's professional engulfers and recyclers, then break them down. Useful components are salvaged. iron is reclaimed and sent back into circulation for reuse. Other parts are dismantled and processed further, with the liver taking up some of the resulting products later. It is a lovely example of the body's refusal to waste what it can recover. Even in cleanup there is thrift. Platelets can also be stored in the spleen to some extent, which gives the organ another role in blood management. It is not simply a dustbin for old cells. It is also a kind of reserve station and checkpoint. In certain situations, the spleen may enlarge, sometimes because it is working harder, sometimes because blood flow or immune activity has changed, and when that happens, its role in trapping or storing blood components can become more obvious. A healthy spleen, though, generally goes about its business without complaint, left of centre and somewhat underappreciated. Its immune role is equally important. The white pulp of the spleen contains lymphocytes, including B cells and T cells, arranged so that antigens in the blood can be sampled and recognised. If bacteria or other pathogens are circulating, the spleen is one of the places where immune responses can be initiated. B cells can become activated and eventually produce antibodies. Macrophages can engulf invaders and present pieces of them to other immune cells, helping coordinate a more specific response. This is part of the immune system's great talent for learning. It does not simply attack everything with equal confusion. It identifies patterns, builds memory, and improves with experience, though not always with perfect manners. That learning function leads naturally into the wider immune organs beyond the spleen, because the immune system is less a single organ than a distributed network of tissues, cells, and training grounds. There are places where immune cells are made, places where they mature, places where they wait, places where they are activated, and places where they carry out their duties. Bone marrow is one of the central starting points. Deep inside bones, marrow is busy making blood cells, including the precursors of many immune cells. White blood cells do not simply appear out of goodwill. They are generated from stem cells in the marrow, which then give rise to different lineages, including the cells that will become neutrophils, monocytes, lymphocytes, and other key players in defense. The bone marrow is therefore not only a factory for red blood cells and platelets, it is also one of the great nurseries of immunity. Some immune cells mature there as well. B lymphocytes, for instance, complete their development in the bone marrow, which is where the B originally comes from in birds, though in humans bone marrow remains the relevant site. T lymphocytes, by contrast, begin in the marrow, but then travel to another organ for maturation, one that's particularly important in childhood and early life, the thymus. The thymus sits behind the sternum in the upper chest, above the heart, and for a long time it puzzled anatomists because it seems prominent in children and then gradually shrinks after puberty. Yet during development it plays an essential role. It is a school for T cells, and perhaps even more than a school, it is a place of testing. T cells are powerful immune cells involved in recognizing infected or abnormal cells and coordinating immune responses. But power without education would be a dangerous arrangement. A T cell must learn to recognize foreign patterns while also tolerating the body's own tissues. In the thymus, developing T cells undergo a kind of selection process. Those that cannot properly recognize the body's own major histocompatibility molecules are removed. Those that react too strongly to the body's own tissues are also eliminated or diverted. What survives is a population more likely to be useful, and less likely to become disastrously self-destructive. The thymus, then, is one of the places where the immune system learns self-restraint. This is quietly one of the most important achievements in biology. A defense system must know not only how to fight, but when not to. Of course, the immune system does not always get that lesson perfectly right. Autoimmune diseases show what happens when tolerance breaks down and the body begins attacking its own tissues. But the fact that such errors are noteworthy tells you how much successful restraint is normally happening. Most of the time, the immune system recognizes an astonishing range of possible threats without turning daily life into a civil war among the organs. That balance between readiness and tolerance is one of the central miracles of physiology. Once immune cells are produced and trained, they need places to gather, circulate, and be activated when needed. This is where lymphoid tissues and organs such as lymph nodes come into the story. Lymph nodes are small, bean-shaped structures scattered throughout the body along lymphatic vessels. They are especially numerous in regions like the neck, armpits, chest, abdomen, and groin. If the spleen filters blood, lymph nodes filter lymph, the fluid that drains from tissues and travels through the lymphatic system. This fluid contains water, proteins, debris, immune cells, and sometimes microbes or foreign particles picked up from the tissues. Before lymph returns to the bloodstream, it passes through nodes where immune cells can inspect it. Inside a lymph node, the organisation is again very purposeful. Different areas are enriched in different cell types. Antigens arriving in the lymph can be trapped, processed, and presented to lymphocytes. B cells may become activated and begin proliferating, sometimes forming germinal centres where they refine their antibody responses. T cells may also be activated and expand. If you have ever had swollen glands in the neck during an infection, what you were often feeling were lymph nodes becoming more active and enlarged as immune cells gathered and multiplied there. This is one of the few times the ordinary hidden work of immune organs becomes physically noticeable. A node swells not because it enjoys drama, but because it has become a busier checkpoint. The lymphatic system more broadly serves as both drainage and surveillance. Fluid constantly leaves the blood vessels and enters tissues, delivering substances and bathing cells. Much of it returns directly to the bloodstream, but some enters lymphatic vessels and becomes lymph. These vessels eventually return lymph to the venous circulation, but along the way they route it through nodes. This means tissue fluid is not simply leaked and recollected, it is reviewed. The immune system gets a chance to sample what is happening out in the tissues before that fluid rejoins the blood. The body is very fond of checkpoints, and with good reason. There are also immune tissues stationed at major entry points, where the body most directly encounters the outside world. The tonsils, for example, sit at the back of the throat, part of a ring of lymphoid tissue that samples material entering through the mouth and nose. They are strategically placed to notice inhaled or swallowed pathogens early. Similar lymphoid tissues are found in the intestines, including Peyer's patches in the small intestine and other gut-associated lymphoid tissues. This makes perfect sense. The digestive tract is one of the largest interfaces between body and world. Food, microbes, and foreign proteins arrive there constantly. Immune tissues stationed along the gut help distinguish between harmless dietary material, helpful resident microbes, and genuine threats. It is a complicated assignment, and perhaps one should not be too harsh on the occasional overreaction when the daily workload is considered. The appendix, once dismissed as an evolutionary leftover with no useful purpose beyond occasionally causing surgical inconvenience, is now thought to contain lymphoid tissue and may contribute to immune functions in the gut, perhaps even serving as a kind of safe house for beneficial microbes. Whether or not it enjoys this rehabilitation of its public reputation, it is another reminder that immune tissues are distributed and often hidden in places people once considered unimportant. Biology does not always label its most useful structures clearly for our convenience. To understand these organs fully, it helps to say a little more about the cells themselves, though without turning bedtime into an immunology exam. The immune system includes many cell types, each with different strengths. Neutrophils are fast responders, good at rushing to sites of infection and engulfing microbes. Macrophages are long-lived eaters and messengers, cleaning debris and presenting antigens to other immune cells. Dendritic cells are particularly good at picking up antigens and carrying them to lymphoid tissues to activate lymphocytes. B cells can become plasma cells that produce antibodies, proteins that bind specific targets. T cells come in several flavours, including helper cells that coordinate responses and cytotoxic cells that can kill infected or abnormal cells. Natural killer cells contribute to defence against certain infected or tumour-like cells, without needing the same level of prior recognition. Together, these cells create a defense system that is layered, redundant, and surprisingly nuanced. One of the most remarkable things about immunity is memory. After an infection or a vaccine, certain B cells and T cells remain as memory cells, ready to respond more rapidly and effectively if the same threat appears again. This is part of what makes vaccination possible. The immune system is introduced to a harmless or controlled version of a pathogen's features and learns from it without requiring the full danger of the disease itself. Later, if the real pathogen arrives, the response can be faster and stronger. In a way, immune organs are not only defenders, they are archivists. They remember what they have seen and keep records in living form. That memory, however, must coexist with tolerance. Not every foreign thing should trigger a full-scale alarm. Food proteins are foreign in one sense. Harmless environmental particles may be foreign. The trillions of microbes living in and on the body are certainly not genetically self. The immune system must decide what requires a response and what requires peaceful coexistence. When this balance tilts too far toward reactivity, allergies and hypersensitivities can result. When it tilts too far toward failure of surveillance, infections may gain ground more easily. Again and again, the theme is balance. The immune system is not merely strong or weak. It is appropriately tuned or poorly tuned. The spleen and immune organs are also involved in cleanup beyond infection. Cells in the body die all the time through ordinary turnover. Damaged cells must be removed. Broken proteins, cellular fragments, and the remnants of everyday wear and tear need clearing. Macrophages in lymphoid tissues, spleen, liver, and elsewhere contribute to this quiet housekeeping. Without them, tissues would fill with debris, and signals of damage would persist in ways that might confuse or inflame the body. Protection, then, is not always about defeating invaders. Often it is about removing the leftovers of normal living before they become a problem. There is also a deep connection between the immune system and the blood itself. Blood carries immune cells everywhere, and some of those cells move constantly between blood, tissues, and lymphoid organs. They circulate exit vessels, patrol tissues, and then return through lymphatic routes. This is why the immune system feels less like a single fortress and more like a mobile network with local bases. The spleen watches the blood directly. Lymph nodes watch tissue drainage. The bone marrow produces new forces. The thymus trains some of them. Mucosal tissues guard the borders. And throughout all of this, countless cells are moving, communicating through cytokines and surface signals, coordinating responses that may be local or body-wide. When immune organs are absent or impaired, their importance becomes much clearer. People without a spleen, for example, can live, but they become more vulnerable to certain serious infections, especially from encapsulated bacteria that the spleen helps clear effectively from the blood. Vaccination and extra caution often become particularly important. When bone marrow fails, blood cell production suffers across the board. When the thymus is deficient early in life, T-cell development can be badly compromised. When lymph nodes are damaged or removed, lymphatic drainage may be impaired and immune surveillance altered. The body can compensate impressively in some cases, but the gaps reveal just how much ordinary health depended on these organs being quietly present. Inflammation is another part of the immune story worth mentioning, because it is one of the body's most visible defense responses. When tissues are injured or infected, blood vessels may widen, permeability may increase, immune cells may be recruited, and chemical signals may produce redness, heat, swelling, and pain. These signs are not random annoyances. They are part of a coordinated attempt to bring resources to a problem. Yet inflammation is also one of those tools that can cause trouble if excessive, misdirected, or prolonged. The immune system protects best when it is precise. Too little response and danger spreads. Too much response and the body may suffer from its own defense. There is something deeply human in that pattern. Protection is necessary, but unchecked vigilance can become damaging. The immune system, in its own biochemical way, seems to understand the same truth. It must be alert, but not hysterical. It must act, but not destroy indiscriminately. It must remember, but not overreact to every passing harmless detail. The spleen and immune organs are part of the machinery that helps strike that balance, turning defense into something more thoughtful than mere aggression. And so, hidden beneath the ribs, behind the sternum, within bones, along vessels, and at the borders of the gut and throat, these organs keep watch. They remove tired cells from circulation. They inspect blood and lymph. They train defenders, store information, coordinate responses, and clean up the aftermath. They are not often thanked, but they are always involved. Every ordinary scrape that heals without disaster, every cold that resolves, every harmless food molecule ignored, every worn-out blood cell quietly recycled, every vaccine remembered years later, all of these depend in part on this distributed protective world inside you. It is a fitting place to pause, not because the body has finished its work, but because by now the deeper pattern has become clear. No organ truly lives for itself. The brain depends on blood, the heart depends on oxygen, the lungs depend on breathing muscles and circulation, the liver depends on incoming nutrients and outgoing waste pathways, the kidneys depend on blood flow and in turn shape it, the stomach prepares, the intestines absorb, the pancreas regulates, the spleen and immune organs defend. Each one is busy with its own task, but none of them are solitary. And perhaps that is the gentlest thought to carry into the final stretch of this journey, where all these separate labours can finally be seen together, not as isolated performances, but as one strange and beautiful cooperation that has been keeping you alive all along. There is something deeply comforting about realising that your body is not a collection of lonely parts working in isolation, but a living partnership of organs that spend every moment adjusting to one another. The brain does not simply issue orders into the dark and hope for the best. The heart does not pump for its own amusement. The lungs do not fill and empty as a private hobby. The liver does not sort chemicals out of personal pride. The kidneys do not filter blood because they enjoy being difficult. The stomach, intestines, pancreas, spleen, and immune organs are not off in separate corners, doing unrelated tasks like co-workers in a badly managed office. They are all in conversation. They are all dependent. They are all involved in the same shared project, which is to keep you alive, stable, responsive, nourished, protected, and somehow still able to function, even after a poor night's sleep, an overly hurried lunch, a stressful email, and whatever else the day decided to throw in your direction. That cooperation is one of the great hidden facts of ordinary life. Most of us move through the day feeling as though we are one thing, a single self, a single body, a single stream of thought and sensation. And in one sense, of course, that is exactly right. But underneath that feeling of unity is a tremendous amount of specialization. One organ is handling circulation, another is managing gas exchange, another is regulating fuel storage and chemical processing, another is maintaining fluid and electrolyte balance. Others are digesting, absorbing, defending, signaling, repairing and cleaning up. The miracle is not that these organs are different. The miracle is that they work together so well that you mostly experience the outcome as one seamless life. Think of how many conditions must be held within useful range for you to sit quietly and listen. Your brain needs a steady supply of oxygen and glucose. That means the lungs must be exchanging gases effectively, and the heart must be moving oxygenated blood to the head with reliable pressure. The kidneys must be keeping electrolytes within narrow limits so that nerve cells can fire properly and muscles can respond when needed. The liver must be smoothing out fuel availability, processing nutrients, storing what is useful, and neutralizing what is not. The pancreas must help ensure that blood sugar rises and falls within workable boundaries. The intestines must have absorbed nutrients and water from earlier meals. The immune system must not be so distracted by infection or inflammation that the whole internal balance is thrown off. Even a quiet moment depends on an enormous amount of coordinated labour, and that coordination is not occasional, it is continuous. A body is never finished balancing itself. There is no moment when the organs can collectively say, "There we are, all done now, Everyone can go home. The heart keeps beating, the lungs keep moving air, the kidneys keep filtering, the liver keeps processing, the brain keeps monitoring, the digestive organs keep handling whatever is still in transit. Immune cells keep watching. Sleep changes the kind of work being done, but not the fact of work itself. Rest is not a shutdown. It is a different mode of maintenance. In some ways, the body is most impressive when you are least aware of it. Homeostasis is the word scientists use for this ongoing regulation, and while it can sound technical, the idea is surprisingly gentle. It does not mean that the body keeps everything perfectly fixed at all times. It means the body keeps bringing things back into a workable range. Temperature drifts a little, then is corrected. Blood pressure rises or falls, then is adjusted. Blood sugar changes with meals and fasting, then is regulated. Water is lost, then conserved. Acids accumulate, then are buffered and excreted. It is not stillness. It is controlled movement. It is a body always responding to change without letting change become disaster. That is why it helps to think of the organs not just as structures, but as relationships. The lungs and heart are obvious partners. The lungs load oxygen into the blood and remove carbon dioxide. The heart sends that blood through the body and brings it back for renewal. One without the other is immediately limited. But the same pattern exists everywhere else. The liver processes nutrients arriving from the intestines, and the intestines depend on bile from the liver and enzymes from the pancreas to digest food properly in the first place. The kidneys excrete urea made by the liver and regulate the water and salts that influence how the heart and blood vessels function. The pancreas helps the liver decide whether incoming glucose should be stored or released. The brain regulates breathing, appetite, stress responses, and hormone patterns, but it depends completely on the blood chemistry maintained by those same peripheral organs. The spleen and immune tissues protect the blood and body from threats that could damage every other organ if left unchecked. It is not a hierarchy so much as a web. This is one reason illness can feel so strange and so total. When one organ struggles, the effects are rarely limited to that organ alone. If the lungs fail to oxygenate properly, the heart must strain, the brain becomes foggy, the muscles weaken, and the kidneys and liver work under altered conditions. If the heart cannot circulate blood well enough, the kidneys receive less flow, the liver may become congested, the brain becomes less well supplied, the lungs may fill with fluid, and the entire body feels the shortage. If the kidneys stop filtering properly, electrolytes shift, fluid accumulates, blood pressure changes, the heart rhythm may become unstable, the brain may grow confused, and waste products begin affecting many tissues at once. This is not because the body is poorly designed, it is because the organs are deeply integrated. Their strengths are shared, but so are their burdens. The happier version of that same truth is health. When the organs cooperate well, the benefits ripple just as widely. A good night's sleep helps the brain, but it also helps hormone balance, blood pressure, appetite regulation, immune function, and metabolic control. Regular movement strengthens the heart and circulation, improves insulin sensitivity, supports lung efficiency, influences bowel function, and often improves mood and sleep as well. Adequate hydration helps the kidneys do their work, supports blood volume, aids digestion, and influences circulation and temperature regulation. Nutritious food supports the liver, pancreas, intestines, immune system, muscles, brain, and more. Almost every healthy habit works because the organs are connected. Very little in biology stays in one lane. There is also something quietly moving about the fact that these organs do not all work in the same style, and yet they still cooperate. The heart is rhythmic and muscular, the lungs are soft and expansive, the liver is chemical and methodical, the kidneys are selective and exacting, the stomach is mechanical and acidic, the intestines are absorptive and patient, the pancreas is both digestive and hormonal, the spleen is watchful and cleansing, the brain is electrical, interpretive, and endlessly adjusting. They are not copies of one another. They solve different problems with different tools, and yet they fit together into one body with extraordinary consistency. It is a lesson in diversity without disorder. A body works not because every part does the same thing, but because every part does its own thing in relation to the others. Even time is shared between them. The organs all live on rhythms. The heart has its beat. The lungs have their breath. The stomach and intestines have their cycles of digestion and movement. Hormones rise and fall through the day. The liver shifts its work between feeding and fasting states. The kidneys alter water conservation across sleep and waking. The immune system changes activity over time. The brain follows circadian patterns of alertness, rest, and restoration. A healthy body is not merely organized in space, it is organized in time. Different organs become more active in different ways at different hours, and much of health depends on those rhythms being allowed to operate without too much constant disruption. The body can adapt to a great deal, but it works best when its internal timing is not under permanent siege from stress, erratic sleep, and the modern habit of pretending midnight is basically afternoon with worse lighting. One of the most humbling parts of all this is how little direct control you have over most of it. You can decide what to eat, whether to sleep, whether to take a walk, whether to breathe slowly for a moment, whether to keep drinking coffee as if consequences were a myth. But you cannot personally sit beside the liver and supervise glycogen storage. You cannot consciously instruct the kidneys on potassium handling. You cannot manually manage gastric acid release, red blood cell recycling, or pulmonary gas diffusion. The organs are not waiting for your tiny daily managerial input. They know their work. In many ways, the deepest trust you place in your body is not the trust you think about, but the trust you're already living through every second by not having to do all of this yourself. That trust can be difficult to feel when the body is tired, unwell, or behaving in ways that are frustrating. Many people spend more time feeling at odds with their body than grateful for it. The body gets hungry at inconvenient times, feels pain, ages without asking permission, reacts to stress, carries scars, becomes inflamed, gets exhausted, and does not always match the neat standards people imagine it should. But underneath those frustrations is still a remarkable loyalty. Even when the body is under strain, the organs are still trying to keep order. A fever is part of defense. Nausea is often protection. Fatigue can be a warning or a request for recovery. Increased heart rate under stress is the body preparing for demand. Not every symptom is useful in the moment, and not every bodily response is ideal, but most of them make more sense when viewed as attempts at regulation, rather than random betrayal. The body is not trying to ruin your plans. It is trying to preserve life under changing conditions. Sometimes it succeeds gracefully. Sometimes it overcorrects. Sometimes it carries the marks of genetics, injury, infection, or time. Sometimes the organs compensate so well for so long that by the time trouble becomes visible, they have already spent years working around it. That too is a kind of devotion. A struggling organ often keeps going long after a more dramatic system would have given up and submitted a formal complaint. Perhaps that is why this final part of the journey feels less like a list of organs and more like a change in perspective. At the beginning, it is easy to think of the body in separate pieces. Here is the brain, here is the heart, here are the lungs, here are the kidneys, and yet the longer you sit with it, the harder those separations become to maintain. The brain is shaped by the blood the heart moves. The heart is shaped by the oxygen the lungs provide. The lungs are shaped by signals from the brainstem and by the circulation the heart maintains. The kidneys affect the heart through volume and electrolyte control. The liver supports the brain and muscles by managing fuel. The intestines feed the liver and body. The pancreas guides how that fuel is handled. The spleen and immune tissues protect the whole arrangement from internal and external threats. No organ tells the whole story, only the cooperation does, and that cooperation is happening right now. Not in theory, not in a textbook, not in a medical diagram with tidy labels and cheerful arrows, inside you, at this very moment. Your heart is moving blood. Your lungs are refreshing it. Your liver is processing what has arrived from earlier meals and from the body's own metabolism. Your kidneys are refining the plasma and adjusting fluid chemistry. Your brain is building this listening experience out of sound and memory and attention. Your immune system is watching. Your digestive organs are continuing whatever stage of work remains from the day's eating. All of it is current. All of it is real. All of it is quiet. There is a nice steadiness in that thought before sleep. Long after your to-do list loses its urgency, long after screens go dark and conversations end, long after the conscious part of the day begins to loosen its grip, the body continues with an older and steadier rhythm. The organs do not care much about unfinished emails. They care about oxygen, glucose, pressure, temperature, electrolytes, repair, defense, and rest. They keep their attention on the practical essentials. In a strange way, they are wiser than the worrying mind. They're not interested in spiraling. They are interested in balance. That does not make the body perfect, but it does make it worthy of respect. You're being carried through life by systems so coordinated that most of the time you only notice them when something interrupts the usual quiet. But the quiet itself is an achievement. A stable heartbeat is an achievement. A normal breath is an achievement. Clear thinking, steady hands, comfortable digestion, proper filtration, immune tolerance, good sleep, healed skin, balanced blood chemistry. All of these are achievements. Ordinary life is supported by extraordinary physiology so routine that it becomes invisible. And perhaps that is the gentle thought worth keeping nearby as the day settles. Beneath your thoughts is a body still working in good faith. Beneath the noise of life is a quieter order. Organs different in shape, function and style are cooperating without applause, keeping the blood moving, the air exchanging, the fuel managed, the wastes removed, the threats watched, and the whole strange living arrangement held together. You do not need to supervise it. You do not need to hurry it. You can simply let yourself rest. A little while your heart continues its rhythm. Your lungs continue their rise and fall, and the rest of the body carries on with the calm, practiced work it has been doing for you all along.